To all our guests in our virtual meeting room and to everyone watching online. My name is Margaret Gordon. I'm chairing the Scrutiny Panel. So just some housekeeping points before we start. This meeting is being recorded, live streamed now. Please can you all keep your microphones on mute throughout the meeting. This will prevent any audio feedback. If you're still getting feedback, please turn off nearby devices. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand to get my attention and introduce yourself, stating your name and affiliation before you make a comment. One attends not to have any conversations with other participants to provide personal information. I discourage you from using the chat at all this evening. This is formally recorded. Please only use the chat function where absolutely necessary to alert me that you wish to speak or to raise points of order or tech problems. It's a formal meeting of Hackney Council. Please note that the press may be in attendance. The rights of the press and public to record and film the meeting will apply. So I'm now going to move on to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. I've had apologies from council members, Billington, Patrick, Adijare, and Councillor Joseph is attending virtually. Are there any other apologies?
Councillor Garbutt may be attending late.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Woodley and Councillor Bramble will try and attend later. They give apologies for lateness.
Thank you. I'm also expecting virtual attendance from Councillor Mette Coburn, I think for the later item, Nicolette Nixon and Jabez Lamb. So I don't think there's any further apologies. I'll move on to item 2, which is urgent items of business. I haven't been notified of any urgent items. So agenda item 3, declarations of interest. I've asked members to declare any interests. Are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Okay, so I'm now going to move on to agenda item 4, which is our first substantive item this evening. This is the poverty reduction voluntary sector update. Okay, thank you. I hope that people can hear me. Please indicate if you can't. So since 2016, the UK government had no official measurement for poverty, nor targets of poverty reduction. Despite this, the Hackney Labour Party manifesto pledged in 2018 that we will tackle poverty, including child poverty, as well as key inequalities in health, education and employment based on solid understanding of the barriers and needs of our different communities, listening to their concerns and expanding on the use of social value. These promises were obviously renewed in our more recent manifesto. The need to address poverty in Hackney was a key finding in the consultation for the Community Strategy 2018 to 2028, and tackling inequality and entrenched poverty is a key priority. This concern has been amplified by the current cost of living crisis. The Scrutiny Panel received an update last year within the strategic framework outlining the Council's approach to poverty reduction, the aims and objectives. The purpose of this discussion this evening is to review how the Council's poverty reduction strategic framework is working in practice, the impact it's having, and how it's been embedded across Council services. In addition, the panel wants to understand how the Council is working in partnership with key stakeholders in the voluntary sector to meet the needs of residents. To support this discussion, we went on site visits last Friday to Woodbury Aid, Chicken Soup Shelter and Stamford Hill Community Centre. Through our site visits in this meeting, we've been engaging with the organisations that have been providing the following types of support. Community shops, advice sector providers, Orthodox Jewish organisations and providing food distribution and other services, holistic support and warm hubs. Before we commence this discussion, I'd like to thank our Hackney Council officers, Nicola Duncan and Charles Clark from the Policy and Strategy Delivery team, for supporting the arrangement for our site visits, and the guests attending tonight from other local partner organisations. I'd in particular like to welcome to the meeting for the discussion the following representatives: Nicolette Nixon from Hope at Morningside, the Hackney Chinese Community Centre, who are represented by Jabez Lamb, the centre manager. And also from the London Borough of Hackney, we've been joined by several Cabinet members and senior officers. So I'd like to welcome Councillor Chris Kennedy, the Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care and Voluntary Sector and Culture, Councillor Rob Chapman, the Cabinet Member for Finance, Insourcing and Customer Service, Councillor Caroline Woodley, who's attending later, Cabinet Member for Families, Early Years, Parks and Play, Councillor Carol Williams, Cabinet Member for Employment, Human Resources and Equalities. I'd also like to welcome Councillor Fajana Thomas, who's also joining us, who's Cabinet Member for, what's your full title?
Community Safety and Regulatory Services.
Thank you very much. Sonia Khan, the Head of Policy Strategic Delivery, and Jenny Zenu, apologies pronunciation, Strategic Lead for Change and Transformation. I've also got other officers who I think are attending for the later items. So I'll leave you to be introduced at a later stage. I'm firstly going to invite Sonia Khan from London Borough of Hackney to give a quick introduction to set the scene. Handing over to you, Sonia.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I have just a couple of minutes just by way of introduction. So last year we adopted the poverty reduction. Oh, is that working? Right. Last year.
I can hear you. I'm not sure about the online. Yes.
Okay. Still an echo. Last year we adopted a framework for poverty reduction, as you say, and we came to speak to the Scrutiny Chairs panel about this. We talked about how we had to get the balance between highly preventative work and meeting immediate needs, and there was some probing of that by you all. So since then, we've been progressing work under the framework and under the steer of the 4 Cabinet members, the Mayor, and Ian as Senior Responsible Officer. What's clear is that the boundaries between that immediate material need that we talked about and the preventative work is actually getting harder to distinguish. That's because the scale of need is so high, and you'll hear that from our partners. There are so many people who are falling into material need. And so if we don't have a proactive offer to meet people's immediate material financial needs that is at a scale that can allow reach, then those pressing needs we'll just see being stored up for future. And so actually it is preventative work. Averting a crisis right now is about prevention. But we are still progressing the longer term work, and I've provided the full presentation to you all, which we'll come back at the next meeting and speak to as well. So to do the work that I've described, we have to then work with partners and with council officers and services in health to make sure that we have an approach that is both meeting the immediate needs, but is as sustainable and preventative as possible. So to do this, we've got to develop close working across the system to make it easier for those on the front line to support residents with practical help and with that more preventative follow-up as well. So it's not just a sticking plaster in the moment. And so that's also underpinned by the right to food commitment, the council motion, because that's about making sure we've got a sustainable approach across climate action, healthier food and poverty reduction work. We're talking about the same people, we're talking about the same substantive need to address people's right to food. What's clear is that this isn't one service. It's not one commission programme, and there's no one single solution, which is why you have the 4 Cabinet members, you have the mayoral steer as well, and you have an approach that needs to work across services and with those really valued partners. There is the resource from Household Support Fund, £5.6 million, which we're very grateful for, but as we've reported before, it's a few £100s per household. It's not going to go far enough, but it does provide a more strategic framework to ensure that we can reach everybody who needs, as many people as possible through that route. So today you're going to hear from those key partners you've invited from the voluntary sector, and their commitment's really key to the work. You're going to hear about the strains and pressures that they face, because as the scale is huge at the moment. But hopefully they'll also bring out the work that's being done to try to address that challenge and work collaboratively as much as possible to be able to respond to the pressures and demands as they come up. And that's why it's important that we've got officers who are really investing time into building those relationships. So as you say, we've got Jenny, we've got Charles and Nicola who supported the visits. And their role is working to facilitate partnerships across the system, so statutory sector, council services and partner community partners, but also to look at how on the ground a hyperlocal offer that works at grassroots also works. So I look forward to coming back with the Cabinet members to provide the wider update at the next meeting. But in the meantime, for transparency, we wanted to make sure you had everything today, and I'm happy to follow up and take questions through your officers before the next meeting to make that as productive as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. That's really helpful introduction. I'm now going to move on to our first voluntary sector guest this evening, which is Nicolette Nixon from the Pope at Morningside project. Nicolette, you're very welcome this evening. I'd like you to present on the work.
I didn't hear any of that.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'll try with the microphone. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yeah. I could hear you until you told me what you wanted me to present, and then I lost you.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to present on your work in the project for up to 10 minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Lovely.
Yeah, I'll start with what we actually do, and then I'll just move on. So we were previously Gascoigne and Morningside Youth Club. We became a charity just shortly a couple of years ago. So we currently run a food bank which supports about 700 people a week. We're a food hub which supports a further about 1,500 people each week. A youth club that operates 5 days a week, and we feed children every day. So we're feeding on average 30 to 40 children a day. A warm space, we do exercise group for elders, and we do a community lunch. In addition to that, we do signposting to other partners, and we work collaboratively with other BCS organisations. We provide practical and emotional support, I would say, within the community. Because over time we've had people throughout the pandemic that are still with us that have come to rely on us for emotional support. And we also recently have become more involved with representing residents around disrepair and some quite serious domestic violence and some other issues that people within the community don't always feel comfortable with talking to statutory services about. The support has remained the same, but it's changed as well, in the sense that we've still got people in food. I think during the pandemic, it was very much focused on the pandemic. Everything was structured. We had things in place to provide support. And there was a lot of support. There was a lot of input from the local authority, from everybody pulled together. I think we come out of a pandemic and the cost of living crisis hits, and now we're in the situation where that's impacting on people across the board. So previously we would get support from residents who were working. We're now supporting those residents because they've lost their job. I can give an example of that. For us as an organisation, particularly around food, we haven't got enough food to meet the needs of the people that want to come to us. That's essentially it. We rely on food from the Felix project, and that isn't always healthy food. Today we had a delivery of 27 crates of sandwiches. That's not food, that's sandwiches. So you've got that to contend with. And also you have to make a call who you allow to come into your food bank and who you give that support to. And so it looks quite simplistic when you start, but then once you look into it deeper, an example of this was on Thursday when a lady turned up, very, very smartly dressed, new car, and she had just lost her job. Her husband had terminal cancer and she had no money. So on the surface, you'd look at her and think she's not in crisis, but she was probably in more crisis than people that traditionally look like they are. So as an organisation, we're having to make those judgment calls on a daily basis. Who is and who isn't in crisis, and what support can we give them? And as I say, during the pandemic, I think it was easier because there was a lot of resources, there was a lot of time, we were all focused on one thing. We're now coming out of a pandemic and resources are going elsewhere, and we've all got different things we want to do and different things we want to achieve, and funding just isn't there. And so we're relying more and more on your own resources to support residents. I think how we support residents is by being open, by being supportive and being there for them. And we at Hope, we all come from Hackney, we all live on the estates we serve. We've all got very similar lived experiences to the people we're helping or trying to help. And I think that when you're getting grassroots support, I think there's that trust element there, which isn't always present within statutory services. So particularly with children, a lot of parents won't get involved with schools. They don't feel they're getting the support they should. So they'll come to an organisation like ours. And there's often a lack of trust with statutory services, which was prior to the pandemic, which is, I think, carrying through. What I am seeing with young people is a lot of behaviour changes. There's a lot of aggression. There's a lot of which is being played out in schools. So there's a lot of school exclusions or internal exclusions and external exclusions. And, parents are at their wits' end with that. And I think also with adults are becoming really selfish and demanding and not thinking of others, which is sad, because during the pandemic, I think everyone was trying to help each other. And I think now everyone's trying to get to that food, which because everyone's desperate for food and desperate for support. And so it's becoming really, really difficult to support residents in the sense that the need is so overwhelming. And so many people are coming in, on average, we're getting 10 referrals a week for food. And there's a point where you have to have a cut off. But who do you cut off as an organisation? Who do we cut off? So you either decide, do you just keep bringing people in and just give less food, which doesn't support, it doesn't really do anything. And I also think whilst, the vouchers and things around vouchers is wonderful, you feel like sometimes you've just got, you're like the boy in the dike, you've just got your bum plugged in a hole that is getting bigger and bigger all the time. And what can you do to stop that sort of just totally overwhelming us as individuals and as organisations? I also think, sort of slightly politically, that social landlords have a lot to answer for. They do very, very little to support their residents. And I feel people living in not Hackney Council necessarily properties, but social landlord properties are getting very, very little support from their landlords. There's very little resources going into supporting residents who were transferred out during the huge stock transfers in the sort of early noughties. And so again, you've got disadvantaged residents living in more disadvantaged because their landlords really aren't doing anything to support them. Yeah, I think that's me done, really. It's just very difficult. And what does help, we've got a lot of support. I will mention Charles, Nicola and Jenny, and they've been brilliant. And there was a really great level of support during the pandemic, and that's continued. So we've all built really, really positive relationships. But you need funding. You need just really a lot. I think that the amount of money we need just isn't there to support people. And that's the truth of it. But I don't think it's going to get better. I think it's going to get worse because there's more and more people impacted by this cost of living crisis, and genuinely don't know what the answer is to that. I think that's me.
Thank you very much, Nicolette. Can people still hear me? Yeah. I'm sure that I've certainly got some questions. I'm sure colleagues will have them as well, but I think we'll just move on to our second presentation from Jabez Lam. Apologies, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Please correct me, from the Hackney Chinese Community Service. You're welcome to Scrutiny Panel, Jabez, and please, can you speak for up to 10 minutes about the work that you've been doing? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm James Lam. I'm the manager of the Hackney Chinese Community Services. I start by introducing the center. The Hackney Chinese Community Services is a multifunction community center. We've been around for more than 30 years. Initially, serving the Chinese community since 2017. We are serving the Vietnamese community, Malaysian community, and the wider East and Southeast Asian communities. And we have received an advice grant from the council to provide 8 hours a week advice service. And in the last 2 years, since the Hong Kong BNO visa, we also get additional funding from the Department of Leveling Up for a part-time worker to support Hong Kong BNO holders. And I will start by introducing our activity in the center and likeliness. Our activity is not just about the advice. It is also the other element equally important, which is to give the emotional support and the community support. Our activities usually on weekdays, including a lunch club, are mainly for older people. And alongside the lunch club, we have well-being activity, dance club, dancing, singing, yoga and table tennis, karaoke, and activities. And many of our users, mainly are older people, and a lot are non-English speaking, which is the main barrier how most people find in accessing services. And we provide 4 levels on the advice service alone. We provide 4-level advice. Very often, our member receive letters from the council, from the hospital, from the supplier, landlord, and they do not understand and bring the letter to us. And on the immediate level is to explain to them what the content of letters, and sometimes if we need follow up, it would go to the advice worker. Follow up would include things like a telephone call, making application, making representation. And one thing in particular, these days a lot of services are accessed by online application or connection. And for older people and for non-English speakers, that is in particular difficult. So many of our works are around supporting access to service, in particular online services. But more complicated cases will refer to the manager, and some may require special service. Then we will refer to external more specialist users. I want to spend a bit of time about the Hong Kong situation. Although the funding is not from the Hackney, but we do a lot of work in support the Hong Kong BNOs. There are more than 160,000 Hong Kongers coming to the UK since the BNO visa scheme launch. And our center is one of the few local organizations that are providing specialist support for Hong Kong. And Hong Kong BNOs are, although they can work, they can study, they can live here, but they are subject to no recourse to public fund. As new migrants, we do a lot of work in supporting them to find accommodation, to find school, to look for job, and or for job training, practical knowing how the system works. How, for example, apply for NI number, apply for register with GP, and all those are setting up to become settled. Is part of how is part of our work. But as the Hong Kong are arriving, coming to the second year, we start to see other issues that start to emerging. When they first arrive, they are mainly on the settling, getting their feet on the ground. But now we start to see situation like employment dispute, domestic violence, and social issues are start to emerging. And when they first came, because of the situation in Hong Kong, very often generation of families are come together. Thought that is better to be together than risk the persecution, and have overlooked the difficulties as when they were in Hong Kong, they live separately, and when they are coming together, very often they're in the same household, and the kind of intergeneration conflict also start to emerge. The BNO scheme and the Hong Kong coming coincide with the end of the COVID. Before and after the COVID, all our services are mainly face-to-face. During the COVID, because of the lockdown, we switched our service to telephone inquiry on advisor, and our lunch club and activities, we also switch it to a regular call up to our members to check that they have the food, they have the supply, they have the medication, and we do a weekly call up to our members to give them support. Many have experienced the added the problem apart from caused by the pandemic is that the NTEs and Southeast Asian hate crime have been on the increased by 3 times during COVID time. And from that, we are one of the few organizations that have worked very closely with the Metropolitan Police in monitoring situation and tackling the hate crime, and support the victim of hate crime, how to address the situation. So in that aspect, in compound to the lockdown, this hate crime has caused a lot of hardship and isolation and fear. And during that time, we expand our services to develop mental health support and counseling services, and that become a regular service now. With the we are part of the consortium of the well-being network. And in terms of support, we find the council's advisory forum is very useful. That is a forum that we can share a lot of information and knowing what the services around, and that also about the training opportunity and networking. So in terms of the funding of the Department of Living funding is end in March this year, and our work started on the Hong Kongers advice, and that is a funding gap. We are now looking for alternative sources to fill that gap. I think that's what I'm going to talk about is on the advice work.
Well, thank you really to both of you. Actually, I think for so vividly describing, you know, the work you're doing in the community and how this is sort of, you know, and how you've managed to grow and adapt your organisations in the face of what's, you know, is overwhelming need. I'm going to kick off with a couple of questions, and then I think colleagues will want to come in. My first question is really, I think, can people hear me? Yeah, it wasn't working before. Neither of them was working. Neither of them were working. People hear me?
Yeah, yeah,
Can you hear me? Yeah, Nicolette didn't hear me when I was.
I can now.
Yes.
I'll try and speak a bit louder. Yeah, is that one working? No.
Say again. Say again.
It's just flashing. It's just flashing.
We can hear you on the live stream.
Yeah, can you, shall I try and speak a bit louder so people can hear me in the room? Can people hear me online? Just wave or put a thumbs up if you can hear me or not.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm just going to kick off with a couple of questions. I think the first thing that occurred to me when I was hearing your description of your work is really whether you have enough time and resource really to ensure your own, you know, physical health and well-being in the, you know, the light of all this work that you're doing, and also that of your workers. So I just really wanted to, you know, just ask you whether there's anything else that, you know, that we as a council can do to ensure that, because I mean, I think working in this sort of space all the time must be a really sort of very challenging thing to do. So the second question I had really was a sort of practical question about Hackney Council has recently established a money advice hub. I just really wanted you to feed back your experience of referring residents to that and how that's working. I don't know who wants to start.
I'm happy to start. To be honest, maybe I'm a bit flippant. I think we're coping really well. I think we live in our community. We're part of our community, and this is what we want to do. And so we don't go home at the end. You know, it's great. It sounds really bitchy, but people say, oh, I love working in Hackney. Then they go home to their nice houses outside Hackney. We live here, so it's to our benefit to make sure our community gets the support it needs, because we live here. This is our lives. You know, we're not dipping in and out. We do it because we want to enhance how we live. And, you know, if we don't do it, who's going to do it for us? I'm a great believer that communities can support themselves from within. And if we can't support ourselves, I think we've got a really major problem. So for us, I think we all give ourselves a lot of moral support and a lot of support. You know, you have to laugh at things that are really awful, sometimes quite tragic, and you know, but you have to keep a sense of humour. And I think but I mean, I think we did some peer support with Hackney, which was really helpful during the pandemic. So that was really good. And I think there is the space to speak to people if you need support. I know I can phone people and speak. I think I was going to say something which maybe isn't one of your questions. I think another of the problems here is there is a growing divide between the haves and have-nots, which is causing really serious problems. And I think we're on the cusp of, you know, that needs to be addressed, because there is so many wealthy people here, and you know, we have islands of poverty, and that's a real problem for me. So I forgot the second question because I started.
Your experience of the Money Hub?
Oh, the Money Hub's brilliant. I mean, I think it's overwhelmed. I think anyone who thought that wasn't going to be overwhelmed really surprises me, because it is good. We do it monthly with them. And you know, the first time was all around vouchers. They're now focusing more on benefit, which is what it should be about. And you know, they're really empathetic. The ladies that come to us have got a grasp for what they need to do, and the residents can relate to them, and I think that's really important. So for us, the Money Hub is working really well.
That's really good to hear. Jabez, do you want to come in?
Yeah, for us, I think we're fortunate in the sense that we also get support from the council and the GLA to invest in a new centre, the old bathhouse in the borough, that the council is now putting investment to renovate the old bathhouse for us to move in. and that has a lot of encouragement to the East and Southeast Asian community, and that generate a lot of volunteers, and the interest from the community to take part in activities help us a lot in give the encouragement to all the staff that we have something positive to looking forward to, and although the work volume are overwhelming, but with the volunteer support, we are able to share our some of our work, and also share a lot of we have a lot of working groups to look at specific areas of concerns, and so we have a lot of support network with the volunteers that bring us feel less less isolated, and feel that we have a prospect of looking at a community development, whereby in the past we feel that the East and Southeast Asian community has not been recognized, and this is something that keep us going. And in terms of the money advice, that I can't agree more, and that well, when we approach them, they're always helpful and able to give us guide us on areas and advise us how to go about things.
That's really good to hear. Thank you both. I've now open questions to colleagues. Councillor Hayhurst, does anyone else want to come in? Or yeah, and Councillor Potter. So if you both come in, and then yeah.
Ian, this is more to you. In terms of the money hub, as I understand it, a large part of that was helped by funding from our health partners, serving, as Nicola indicated, serving two main areas, one giving out discretionary grants, another one a team of people helping people claim unmet benefit. As I understand it, there's around 13 million, we estimate, of unmet benefit in the borough per year. The target was at the end of this year, as I understand it from what went to the Health and Wellbeing Board, to try and close 1 million of that 13 million of unmet benefit. As I understand it, we're on course to do that. So 500,000 has been saved in the first 6 months, and we're hoping to save another 500,000 in the next 6 months. Should that rate continue, can you provide resource for that to continue? Now, I appreciate the discretionary pot, if money came from our health partners, might be a bit more tricky to backfill or continue. But in terms of if we are saving £500,000 or getting £500,000 into people's pockets every 6 months, until that sort of significantly drops off, what can we do at the end of sort of the funding gap for a year to make sure that continues, and to what extent can we make that a priority?
I'm happy for you to take that question. I don't know whether Councillor Chapman wants to come in, but or Sonia.
Super, that's the right thing. Thank you very much for that question, Councillor Hayhurst. So absolutely, the team's been a fantastic success since it started, and I think the figures you quote are exactly the sorts of success rates we're achieving, and I think the team continue to do more. What we are doing is looking closely at how we can fund that team beyond the current pilot period. Obviously, you'll be aware that only a few months ago the council agreed its budget for 23, and obviously we're in a very challenging financial position. But what we are recognising is that the return on the investment we've seen from it means that, particularly as we're at that stage in the financial year end, where we're looking at any one-off windfalls or underspends that may have accrued from selective sources of funding, we'll look to try and prioritise that and work closely with Councillor Chapman to see what opportunities we can identify. I think it is also worth saying that currently what we are looking to do is continue to move around the total resource within financing resources, and we've currently been successful in covering a lot of costs through internal staff redeployments. I think staff we've been moving from some teams into others have done absolutely fantastic job really picking up the baton. And we've also looking to find other non-current funding through, for example, the Household Support Fund, which allows us to invest in advice provision for the year as well. What I would say, and maybe put a play in for people in the overall financial position every month, which I know is probably one of the most report to the cabinet. We look to provide an update on all the work we're doing in terms of cost of living response, so that it's there as a public record.
Do you want to add anything, Councillor Chapman?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, I'm absolutely, obviously, fully behind all of that. I think, yeah, one of the points I always make when I have discussions around cost of living support is that there's a huge amount we can do at the council, but we're never going to be able to solve the whole problem. I mean, just the reduction and, you know, the £10 a week uplift, you know, the government was for during COVID, just removing that took 35 million out of Hackney, you know, and basic levels of benefits don't pay, you know, if you, Joseph Roundtree, the Foundation reports and others don't actually cover basic living costs, you know, the benefit systems, we said a number of times in Hackney, are broken. Nationally, only the national government solve that. So but there's a huge amount of stuff we can do, you know, to support people you have approached us and through other through the community, and it is really important to do that. And I think the whole business of, you know, just maximising the amount of benefits people can claim and making sure everyone gets is probably the most important. In one way, I won't say one element of our work's more important than others, but it's a vital piece of work and really does pay huge dividends. And I think there's a commitment to make sure that however we organise ourselves in the future, we continue this stream of work. And I should add, particularly concentrating on the voluntary sector tonight, the other organisations on the council are also doing this work with our support and on their own, and you know, it's a joint effort. And I know people like Nicolette and others are, you know, very involved in all this. So obviously, with their support and help as well, it's something I think we're actually committed to making sure we can carry forward in one form or another.
Sonia?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate Ian's point that the conversations are very live and going on at the moment. And there is, as you say, the distinction between the distribution of discretionary funds and the investor save, if you like, although it's obviously not a saving for us, that people get their benefits, but that approach. And looking at how we balance both. Ian's mentioned the household support fund, so that is key, that there's now an ability to be able to fund work that's not just distributing funding in the admin linked, and so looking at that specifically. But I just wanted to make the point that it's also a way of working that isn't just about helping residents get benefits. It potentially has other there are potentially other opportunities, for example, around debt collection, and Ian's alluded to, you know, that being linked to looking at deploying staff as opposed to additional, you know, having to bring in additional ongoing funding. So there's just more opportunities aligned to the poverty reduction framework as well. And final point is that it does work best when there's the centralised money hub support, but it does then connect with the wider system, who can also be distributing that discretionary funding rather than it all bottlenecking with Money Hub, so that they're not overwhelmed, as Nicolette said. And also, so that with working with community partners, we can make sure that the support does reach residents, because not that many residents we really need to reach are going to pick up the phone line or go on an online application directly. They're going to be encouraged by those community partners, a couple of whom we've heard from today.
Thank you. Councillor Cotter, did you want to?
Really hear the thank you for the work that you're doing and for coming tonight. That's to both the Chinese Community Centre and to Morningside as well. Really hear the pressures you're under, and also slightly more positively some of the collaborative work and partnership work that you're engaging with the council is helping to a certain extent. When we went on a site visit last week, we went to Woodbury Aid, where they've kind of gone from a food bank model to more of a community shop, where, you know, a small contribution is made, and they're finding that it's helping them to be more sustainable and also to better able to support more residents that need that support. And also they kind of reckon that it also reduces the stigma of accessing the food at a much reduced rate. I wondered whether you thought about the model of a community shop as something that you might explore in, when you think about developing the work you do. Nicolette, probably I'll go to you first if that's okay.
Yeah, we're looking at that. We've just got some funding from, I cannot remember who it's from, City Bridge, I think, for 3 years funding to develop that model and to support partners to develop that model. My one concern, and again, I'll give an example and I'll do it quickly, is that I had a call from a lady who lived on Kingsmead who asked if she could come to the food bank. I said, oh, you've got a community shop there. It's really cheap food. It's good. She said, that's good if you've got the money to pay the £5 you need to get the food. I've not got any money. So again, you get into that. What worries me is you'll get the people that can pay the £5 and will willingly pay it, and those that just really haven't got it, and then you get the arguments and you have to manage the expectations of people. But I do think we've got to go down that route, to be perfectly honest. I think food banks aren't sustainable in the long term, and I think it's a disgrace that we've got food banks in this country personally, but that aside, they're needed at the moment, but I think the long-term plan would be to go towards a community pantry or a community hub where people pay. To be honest, I think stigma is only as deep as the food hub is. I think if you make your food bank a nice, pleasant experience, then people don't feel stigmatized. I mean, some do, but I think we try to make it a really friendly, happy place to come to, which sounds really silly, but because it's not a happy place at all. But but I do think the pantry model is the way to go forward, to be honest, and that's what we're trying to develop.
People with no recourse to public funds, you might be thinking of covering that anyway if you've been considering community shops.
Yeah, I mean, I think the plan is to get away from food banks and go down that route. But then there's a lot of work involved in doing a community pantry or a community shop, and it's not as simple as just opening it up and charging people. But I think there's some really good examples of it across the borough that we're going to be looking at. But I think the aim is to try and get everybody down that route at some point. And again, it's whether you can get affordable food into the borough to do those community shops, because if you haven't got the food coming in, you can't do the food at a cheap price, because food is so expensive to buy now that you've got to make the money to buy the food. So the £3 or £5 won't necessarily cover the cost of the food. So it becomes it's a really finely balanced thing. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's something we're going to try and investigate. And also, as part of this funding, we're going to look at going direct to maybe places like Spitalfields fruit and veg market and places like that to see if we can get fruit and veg at source and things. So there's ways around it.
Thank you. Jacko, did you want to come in on that question? Thank you.
On that, we are looking at developing a community kitchen when we move to the old bathhouse, and that is something that we are looking at linking up our community kitchen with homelessness and food distribution, and that is something that we are we think it's a way also as a community kitchen. If if it makes surplus, the surplus can also power back into the community projects.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, Councillor Hayhurst?
I don't know if this is Sonia or Ian. The civil service allows all its members of staff 5 days volunteering a year, linking into points about system-wide approach and learning by doing. Would this something the council would consider, volunteering in Hackney?
Yeah,
It is something we've looked at before. We've gone down the route, instead of offering people the, you know, the knowledge, the information. There's been sessions about Volunteer Centre Hackney have come and spoken to all staff. We've worked with HR on policies that allow that to be thought about as part of flexible working. I just think in this current climate, that's a more realistic offer than releasing staff for 5 days. And actually then, is it volunteering? Because that's a corporate programme. I know there are pros and cons, and I know that other organisations have been down that route. We did a few years look at it. I think it would be really challenging at the moment. Officers are under so much strain with their day job. And the offer we've got, which is to make sure people are aware of the opportunity to have that partnership with Volunteer Centre Hackney on a regular basis, is probably the more likely to reach more staff and make sure that learning is there. And then to follow up with other opportunities to give people shorter, shorter bite-sized opportunities to learn, all linked to a strategy that's around staff understanding better what's going on the front line.
Any more questions from colleagues? Yeah, Councillor Conway.
This question is for Nicolette and Gervase, actually, and it's really about touching on, I think, what Councillor Chapman was saying, and Ian Williams also, about the efforts of the Money Hub to support residents in ensuring that they're claiming all of the benefits that are that they might be entitled to. In your experience of the residents that you've been supporting, is that one of the primary issues, or are you seeing more often than not people who are receiving everything that they're entitled to but are still struggling, or is it insecure employment? What are the sort of prevailing issues for you, and do you feel that the focus of the Money Hub is suitably focused to what you think those primary issues are?
Just before our voluntary sector partners come in, I think I'm just going to ask Councillor Joseph, who's online, to ask questions. I'm conscious of time, so maybe you could take them both together. Thank you. Councillor Joseph. I can't hear you. Councillor Joseph, I think you're still muted if you're trying to speak. Councillor Joseph? Oh, I think Councillor Joseph, are you able to put your question? Oh, I think she's okay. Yeah,
can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can now. Brilliant, thank you. Yes, we can now. Are you able to put your question?
Thank you. Sorry about that. So for Nicolette and Jabez, I was just wondering if you'd had any opportunities for growing your own food, and what you thought about local opportunities for growing. And I think this would be for Sonia. I was just wondering if you could update us a little bit about the task group on food poverty in education. I know that there was a task group which was mentioned in the report, and
okay. Yeah, shall we start with Nicolette and Jabez on those questions, and then I'll actually because we're just about to finish this item, I think it'd be really helpful to me if you could also maybe mention in your responses, if there's looking forward, if there's how you want to see your relationship with the council and partners developing, anything that can help us in this piece of work, that would be really helpful if you can include that in your answers. Shall I start with Jabez on this occasion? Is that okay? Responding to those questions. So there's one on whether the Money Hub actually meets the need, or whether they need something different of residents, and also about growing food, but that's something you've considered.
On the Money Hub, I think so far our relationship is really that when we have an inquiry that we are not leading appeal or not sure of how to go about, that we go to the Money Hubs, and the response has been very helpful, and and we have assisted some of the users are able to appeal against the benefit situation. And in terms of growing own food, in our current center, well, we have a small scale of a pot that we grow vegetable for our lunch club. We are looking, when we move to the old bathhouse at the back, there will be a bigger area that we are looking at some gardening and growing projects of Far Eastern vegetables. And those are the areas that we are experimenting at our current center. But that is an area that we feel that when we move to the old bathhouse, we could do that in a bigger scale.
No, that's really good to hear. Did you have any comments on how as time goes on, what more you would look for your relationship with the council and partners? Anything, any wish list?
Well, in particular, our lunch club, we are very work very closely with the council and the HCVS, and we're between the lunch clubs in particular that we have a lot of collaboration. For example, recently we have a joint fundraising activity for the situation of the earthquake in Turkey, and also we share our recipes and in fact next month we join work with the Turkish community in doing some fundraising events as well.
Thank you very much. Nicolette, do you want to respond to those questions and points? Thank you.
Yeah. Do you know what? Benefit is never going to be enough, is it? Benefit just isn't enough for people to live on. Your benefit doesn't cover your fuel bills. So I don't think there's ever going to be enough money for anyone who's on benefit to live properly. But coming into the Money Hub, people initially coming for vouchers to get support, immediate support with fuel and food vouchers. And when they have that conversation about other benefits, they then find out that a lot of residents are not claiming all the benefits they're entitled to, particularly elderly people that have got savings. So they think they've got savings, so they can't apply for pension credit, and they can. So I think it's the starting point is always food and getting immediate support on food. But then I think once they start to have the conversation, there's a lot of people that are not getting the right benefits. So I think it's really important that the Money Hub continues. I think it'd be a false economy not to support it, because I think for every pound we can get people, it means it's a pound less that we have to provide them for food. So, and also for fuel. So I think, it does start off with food or vouchers, but I think it then leads on to the bigger question and the bigger picture. As for growing food, no, I run a youth club. We've got a garden. The kids would destroy it in minutes if we grew anything in there. So I mean, that's totally off picture for us. Also, we've got so many people. I don't think we could grow enough to even sort of make a dent in it. So I think it's a great idea. But I don't know that there's enough green spaces in Hackney to provide the food we'd need to support residents. But I do think every little bit helps. So, which is great. So we might do some tubs, but I think that's the best we're probably ever going to do. And I think moving forward, I'd like to see more collaborative working with the council and council officers. I think this was working really well. I think it's good to be able to link us up with like-minded organisations and sort of organisations that can complement each other. I think the most important thing is that the relationship with the council's got to be one where they listen to the sort of like the organisations that are in the grassroots and on the ground and providing the support. And I think that's worked really well so far, and I'm hoping that will continue. But that's what I'd like to see, more sort of collaborative working and more sort of conversations.
Thank you very much. I'll just now go over to Sonia for a brief response to Councillor Joseph's other question.
Thank you. So the task group was convened by the Director for Education, They looked at what was possible to maximise the resource that comes in for free school meals. So, for example, looking at suppliers, procurement, and also how we might be able to leverage in external funding and work with those community partners on the ground and look at where there's innovation as well going on. The Mayor of London then announced that there were going to be free school meals for all ages primary school, which isn't the whole issue, but which does need to be thought about, not least because from an economies of scale point of view, it brings in some more resource that we might want to try to maximise. And so there's been some resetting of the thinking, but those recommendations will be firmed up and shared. And there is the £300,000 which has previously been reported to support the testing and learning on that. I did want to just respond briefly. I know you need to move on to a couple of the other points, but I don't know if on the task group, any of the cabinet members, I know Councillor Woodley, Councillor Bramble aren't here, but I don't know if there's any more to say that you'd want to say or at this stage.
I think the only thing I would say is that the Mayor of London funding isn't a silver bullet that's going to carry on every year. And actually, it's a hard financial ask to the council to work out once that's finished how you carry it on. That's not to say we're not going to do the work, and we don't think, or to say that we don't think absolutely we want to carry it on. But it's a hard ask.
Thank you. I think Councillor Woodley might want to join online. Welcome, Councillor Woodley.
Hi, sorry, am I upside down? Oh, I don't know. Yeah, just on that point, I think even with the 1 year commitment we've got from the Mayor of London, it brings some challenges, because for some schools, particularly if we're looking at kosher food or halal, it might be that they're not all in a position to be covered by the subsidy that the Mayor of London is bringing in. So I think we have to look really carefully at what it means to have a 1 year offer, whether it's going to fall to the council to pick that up in future years, and whether it's really covering the whole wide base of needs that we have. But on the coming back to the food growing point, obviously we do have a relationship with growing communities, and there are ways, whilst we might not have enough land to expand, there are ways of working with other groups that also look at fair trade food and look at bulk purchasing and look at supporting schools with plant-based meals and so on. So there's a lot of innovative stuff that we can do as we go forward.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I certainly think we're going to want to hear more about both those topics and the sort of as this work goes on. But we thought it was really important with this sort of project to start looking at this stream of work by talking to our voluntary sector partners and hearing their experiences. So we're extremely grateful for Jabez and Nicolette for your time and contributions this evening. And obviously you're really, really welcome to get in contact with us as there is further points that you'd like to make. As well as the voluntary sector organisations that we visited the other day. I'm conscious that we've got Councillor Carol Williams and Councillor Kennedy spoken briefly. I don't know whether there's anything you wanted to add, because I know you're one of the cabinet leads on this work stream, but obviously as this work goes on, we're going to be looking in more depth at the council's role in the poverty framework. So over to you, Councillor Williams, do you want to have the last quick word?
I don't want to have the last quick word, but I do want to say thank you to the officers for everything that they have done on this. They have supported us as cabinet lead members to meet on a regular basis. Sorry, I do have a problem with it.
Yeah.
To meet on a regular basis and bringing us a lot of data and information so that we can make the political decisions. They have assiduously supported us and had regular meetings with community and voluntary sector groups. And I think all of us as cabinet lead members at one point or another have attended those fortnightly meetings. So we have been listening to the community and voluntary sector to groups and taking part in those information sharing sessions. We also receive all the newsletters that go out to them and the recording of those meetings as well. It has been incredibly, it's been incredibly good, rewarding for us as members to see how they've implemented learning from previous work we have done. As a council, excuse me for my voice, it doesn't hurt at all, so please don't worry about it. And we learned from that on each case and improved it.
Thank you. That was an extremely helpful last quick word. So, yeah, okay. I'm now going to draw this item to a close because we've got obviously a second substantive item this evening. So, thank you very much everyone who's attended and for your contributions. We're going to have obviously sort of ongoing discussions as this sort of piece of work and scrutiny develops. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're now moving on to agenda item 5. So this agenda item 5 is a call-in of the Cabinet decision, which is one of the responsibilities we have a scrutiny panel to consider these occasions when a Cabinet decision is called in by backbench members of the Council. So, as I was saying, a key element of the scrutiny function is to consider call-ins of the Executive. A call-in was requested on the 3rd of April 2023 by Councillor Spinney Lubbock, supported by 4 other councillors, one of whom is here in person. Councillor Steinberger, welcome. I think Councillor Garbett online, and it's also supported by Councillor Levy and Councillor Papier, who I don't think are present either in person or virtually this evening. The call-in relates to the Executive key decision taken by the Cabinet on the 27th of March 2023 on the introducing of parking charges for motorcycles, CHE, Section 179, for the introduction of parking charges for motorcycles. In summary, the basis of the call-in is that decision maker did not take the decision in accordance with the principles set out in Article 13, 13.3 of the Hackney's Constitution. I would also like to welcome members of the public here, I think are representing campaigning organisations. Thank you for attending the meeting this evening. We've already welcomed the councillors. I'd also like to welcome online Councillor Mette Coburn, Cabinet Member for Environment and Transport. Thank you for attending. And also on the opposite side, in person, we've got Ricardo Hyatt, the Group Director for Climate, Homes and Economy, Kevin Keedy, the Head of Parking and Markets, Dawn Carter-MacDonald, Director of League of Democratic Electoral Services, and Michael Benn, Senior Service Area Manager. So we don't have a lot of detail in the Constitution on the procedure this evening, so I'll just really sort of briefly explain how we're going to be, we propose to proceed. We've got around an hour for this item, so we're going to try and be quite strict on time. So I'm going to start by inviting, I think, Councillor Spinney Lubbock, who is going to be speaking on behalf of the call-in, to speak for up to 10 minutes. And then I'm going to ask officers to respond to the points made, and then there'll be a period of questions and discussion, and then we will then consider what decision to make. I'm now going to go through the options that are available to the panel, so everyone's clear about what we can decide this evening. So the options available are that we take no further action, in which case the decision that was made by the Cabinet will take effect immediately, or that we decide to refer the decision back to Cabinet for reconsideration, setting out the nature of the panel's concerns. The Cabinet must then reconsider the matter, taking into account the concerns of the scrutiny panel before making a final decision. Or to refer the matter back to full council, the panel considers if its recommendations would have an impact on the Council's budget and policy framework. So those are the 3 possible decisions that myself and my colleagues can make this evening. Just to be clear, there's 4 members of Scrutiny Panel who are present in person here who will be making this decision. As Councillor Joseph is attending online, she will not be voting this evening. So So just, do you want me to go through this next? Yeah, so I'd refer to the background of the papers. There's an email notification from Councillor Binny Lovett, which people should have access to in person or online. That was co-signed by Councillors Garbett, Levy, Steinberger and Papier. So I'm not going to, there's a number of detailed grounds set out here, which I don't propose to read out, but they are available for people to refer to the papers online. So I'll now invite Councillor Binny Lovett to make his presentation. I would ask you to try and prioritise the points you're making and to explain any acronyms and also where you're referring to sort of facts and figures, if you could just give us as much detail as possible about this sort. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I would like to begin by stating we didn't take this decision to call in this significant change lightly, evidenced by the fact that a full council, following the petition presented on the 23rd of November last year by campaigners, some of whom are in the room today, we recommended the Cabinet consider more data and evidence before signing this off. However, as you remember, full council voted down our recommendation. I hope today, with our non-party political hats on, scrutiny hats on, the same members can look at this on its merits without fear, favour or outside influence. I won't repeat everything in our call-in, as I trust you pored over the papers before this meeting. Subsequent to the petition, some changes to the scheme were introduced. However, we, the campaigners who Councillor Coban praised for improving the scheme, do not believe these measures go anywhere near far enough to address the concerns around proportionality or consider the full range of relevant evidence or alternative measures available to achieve actually achieve the stated aims. This calling does not dispute or run contrary to the Council's desire to reduce carbon emissions in response to the climate emergency. However, it is not clear how these measures could be considered proportionate, as they risk having an adverse effect, whereby some riders may choose to opt for large, more comfortable, more polluting and congestion-causing cars for short trips or business meetings, or act as a disincentive for people driving those big, comfy, polluting vehicles from swapping to more environmentally friendly means of transport. There is also the budgetary risk that to achieve the stated aim of not effectively banning motorcycle commuting in most of the parking zones, the council would have to install hundreds more bays at considerable cost. On that particular point, I would like to respectfully disagree with the view of the Director of Finance's assessment of the alignment of these proposals with the council's budget. These plans say there will be 50 solo motorbike parking bays available for commuters. However, these are almost all located in just 2 parking zones. Compare that with Camden's 301 parking bays, which are all free to use, or Westminster's, which contains over 400 and a yearly permit available for £100. Before these necessary additional bays are installed at considerable cost, listed in these documents as over £3,000 per bay for upgrading the security measures on existing bays, not to mention the cost of identifying, designating and installing new bays, commuting into these other zones will be effectively banned immediately when this enters implementation stage through lack of provision. This goes against the statements made by the Mayor and Cabinet member responsible and could have a damaging effect on the economy, workers and residents. Crucially, these plans do not reflect a proper hierarchy of travel modes. They come from a premise of treating powered two-wheelers just like cars, and throughout the plans we see the limitations of this crude approach. For instance, those who currently ride powered two-wheelers, including electric motorcycles, will no longer be able to keep them if they live in car-free developments, that's at all. The size of the vehicles and their comparable impact on congestion is not properly taken into account at all. The courier riders, who were considered essential workers during the pandemic lockdowns and who I suspect represent a larger proportion of black and brown people and people for whom English is a second language, were not properly considered in the equalities impact assessment. These plans make it difficult for them to take proper breaks in the borough without incurring significant additional costs. Clearly, the plans are not proportionate if the council predicts a reduction in short stay parking of motorcycle parking of 70%, while at the same time, over the same period, the stated policy ambition for total short stay parking is a reduction of 30%. So why are powered two-wheelers, whose emissions and space profile, or we all agree, are far smaller than cars, vans or trucks, doing the disproportionately heavy lifting in short stay parking reduction plans? The impact on commuters is also clearly disproportionate. Save London Motorcycling estimates that parking charges for the amount to £2,300 a year to commute to the high demand areas, which is where most of the bays currently are, as a more realistic 10-hour parking stay compared with the council's own 8-hour stay estimate. That puts commuting by petrol-powered two-wheelers registered from 2005 at nearly £2,000, or £1,920 to be exact in the council's estimates. Whichever number is used, these costs don't factor in the cost of owning, insuring, running, maintaining a powered two-wheeler either. So a direct comparison with the cost of commuting by public transport has not been correctly represented, as it doesn't factor in a full cost, and no modelling of this has been presented. These estimates show that the plans would still make the average motorcycle commuter parking around 10 to 20 times more expensive than any of the few other London boroughs that have any system of motorcycle parking charge, when most boroughs have no charge at all. There's been no survey or modelling about the impacts on emissions of these proposals. To reach good decisions on the climate emergency, we need proportionate, evidence-led proposals. These plans would seem to make Hackney a very hostile place for powered two-wheeler riders, commuters and key workers. They would make Hackney an outlier in terms of enforcement and would not incentivise many car users to downsize along the hierarchy of vehicles I mentioned earlier. So I'll round it off to basically say, to reiterate the points I made in our call-in notification around proportionality was the first point we made. These plans would disproportionately punitive to powered two-wheelers, out of line with the stated aims of reducing the reliance on the most producing vehicles. Secondly, the presumption in favour of openness. I believe that the scale of these changes and their impact has been downplayed or misrepresented on a number of occasions. Clarity of aims and desired outcomes. No survey or modelling has been presented to show that this would be an effective intervention or monitoring proposed to use as a measure of the proposal's success, both for short stay and residential parking. As the Director of Legal, Democratic and Electoral Services sets out in 5.1, the parking enforcement plan cannot be contrary to the policy framework. Because of this clarification, I would like you to consider the issues raised in that part of the call-in notification in relation to the proportionality case and the budgetary case, as these are all sort of connected, and whether this decision is in the interests of the borough's residents. Namely, by banning motorcycle commuting in most zones in the beginning of the implementation, the costs associated with bringing the council's bay provision in line with other London boroughs, as well as evidence not being sufficiently considered. Number 5 on the budget, obviously that's to address the lack of commuting provision across Hackney. There would be huge additional costs out with the existing budget, and evidence not considered. As mentioned, no comprehensive survey or modelling has been done, no evidence about the real differences in emissions between powered two-wheelers and cars beyond a non-representative snapshot of some individual comparisons presented at 4.3.12, and an unclear and misleading assertion that powered two-wheelers will pay a factor less than the most polluting vehicles, when most cars will also pay a factor less of most polluting vehicles. And finally, the decision is not in the interest of the borough's residents. As I've hopefully illustrated, the evidential base is not there to say that this proposal will achieve its aims. The impacts on the local and gig economies, small businesses and workers in the borough have not been properly factored into the plans. Alternatives along the lines of existing parking charge models in Westminster, Lewisham and Islington have not been considered. Personally, not speaking for all members who asked for this call-in, I would prefer to have seen motorcycle charges rolled into a smart road pricing pilot rather than trying to cram a round peg of motorcycles into a square hole designed for car parking charges. I would recommend that the Scrutiny Panel consider these factors and propose a suitable alternative recommendation to refer back to Cabinet for their consideration. If the Scrutiny Panel doesn't make an alternative recommendation, they will either have to accept that they are effectively banning commuting by motorcycle in most of Hackney, or refer the proposal to full council, as the resources needed for secure motorcycle bays at the scale required is not in the current council's existing budget. Making motorcycle commuting impossible or unaffordable to residents who rely on it for their livelihoods cannot be proportionate, and I thank the members for the panel in advance for giving this call in their due consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Billy Lovett, for sticking to time, and also for providing us with detailed grounds in advance. Just to clarify that, as well as the, your oral presentation, but you're also relying on your written grounds, and that's what we, as members of the panel, will be taking into account. I'd also say, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning, that we've been advised by our legal colleagues that the test that we should be considering, in relation to this call-in, is whether we prefer the decision that's already been taken or an alternative decision. So that's what we're going to be applying our minds to this evening, and you've obviously referenced that in your presentation, just so that everyone's clear on that. I'm now going to hand over, I think, initially to the Cabinet Member, Councillor Coburn. I don't know whether you want to start. I've tried to, obviously there's a number of points. You've obviously seen, heard Councillor B. Lovett's presentation, and also the points that he submitted in writing. I've tried, I'm just going to pick out a few points that I would particularly want a response either from the Cabinet Member or from the officers as part of your response. I would particularly like a response on the question in relation to modelling. I'd also like a response to the question in relation to alternative schemes that have been considered. I'd also like a response to the question to the point that was made in relation to the costs that are going to be paid by commuters and the impact in relation to motorcycle couriers. So I'd be particularly interested in those points, and also the points being made by Councillor Binny Lovett in relation to the projected costs for the installation of short stay bays. So I don't know whether colleagues have got any other points that they particularly leapt out of them and they'd like to hear a response for. We can leave it to discussion as well, obviously. Yeah, thank you very much. Councillor Coburn, do you want to start, or do you
Yeah, I'll start. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and apologies that I can't be there in person today as I had a prearranged trip to be away. I think definitely, obviously, welcome the opportunity for Scrutiny to review this, and I think it's really important. I used to be a Scrutiny Chair myself, and I think the role that Scrutiny plays is incredibly important. But I also think that there is a lot to unpack from what Councillor Billy Lubbock has put forward. I think part of it is I'm not sure how close either Councillor Billy Lubbock or the other councillors putting this forward. I've actually followed the journey of what we've been doing over the last couple of years in relation to motorcycles. But there's a lot to unpack. So bear with me as I try to get through it all, because I think there's a lot of either not having gone through papers properly and not having read it properly, or maybe translated some of the information. But I also find it slightly confusing, because I thought that Councillor Billy Lubbock was very supportive of emissions-based charging model, which completely contradicts everything that he's basically described. But I'll go through it and explain more in detail. So firstly, let me start by taking the opportunity to remind members of the panel about the journey, how we've arrived at this policy. So currently in Hackney, we don't have any parking charges for motorcycles, which is not sustainable and it's not fair on other road user groups. For example, if you cycle, you have to pay for a cycle hanger, whereas motorcycles don't have to pay at the moment. And it's totally contradictory to our sustainable practical goals, and obviously to our ambitions around tackling the climate emergency. This conversation is not new. We had a consultation in 2020, I believe, and officers can confirm, and then we had another consultation which 4,300 people participated in. Then we had another consultation in 2021 with the Parking Enforcement Plan, which had over 8,000 respondents. So it's, I believe, and happy to be corrected, it's actually one of the most consulted piece of policy that the council has ever put forward. So it's had lots of engagement with residents and community groups out there. Obviously, the council took the decision as part of adopting the Parking Enforcement Plan to move towards an emissions-based charging model, which, by the way, as I said, the Green Parties, the councils do support the emissions-based charging model, unless that view has changed since we last had that meeting at the previous cabinet meeting, which means that you pay on how much your car pollutes. So since we took that decision, obviously we understand that the campaigners who we met had some concerns about moving from not paying any charges at all to some of the proposals that we made. So just to be clear with members on record, we've met with the motorcycle, I think it's a London-wide campaign group and a UK-wide campaign group that we've met with them on countless times, actually more than any other road user group in relation to our parking enforcement policy. And I think officers can confirm that as well. And what myself and the mayor and the cabinet obviously committed to was making sure that we're able to phase this in a way which recognises some of the challenges that we know that are facing our economy, like cost of living crisis, etc. And so we've made 3 very significant changes. The first is we've got rid of the maximum short stay hours, which means that people could park as long as they want. Secondly, we've discounted the original prices by 80%, right? And then 90% for electric powered two-wheelers. And then thirdly, we've also put forward a phasing of these charges over the next 3 years, which, if you take that as a package of changes, those are very significant changes. Now, Councillor Billy Lubbock quoted Westminster, which is £1 a day. That was a historic charge that was introduced, by the way, which Westminster Council previously didn't have the same ambitions as Hackney Council in relation to tackling the climate emergency. And I think, it's really important to note that we've got to find the right equity of being able to, make sure that we have a fair offer for residents across the borough. Now, this isn't affecting, we're talking about visitors here, by the way. So there's a number of things that have been misrepresented in this sort of, in Councillor Bin Lubbock's presentation. One is, I think you need to distinguish the difference between those who are resident in Hackney, visitors, so we're talking those who are traveling for leisure or visit a family, friends, shop, etc. But then also those couriers, and I think the couriers bit, I think you totally again, all those 3 different fees have different sort of offers in relation to it. So I think that's one thing to be clear. So we clearly listened because we've made very significant charges. Now, I think that the campaigners have helped improve the policy because, as I say, there'll be things that inevitably we wouldn't have got right. Maybe, but that's the whole point of us listening and engaging, and that's why we put these charges in place. Now, anything further than that, which is not to have a charge, is not an option for us, and it's completely contradictory to everything that our parking enforcement plan puts forward. We believe strongly in the principle of charging. As I say, it's not fair to other road user groups who currently have to pay. But also, like if you think, yes, the size of a power two-wheeler might be smaller than a car, but if you're moving an emissions-based charging model, which, as I said, you've accepted an emissions-based charging model, surely then you charge the cars based on the tailpipe emissions, because that's the whole point and the premise of the emissions-based charging model. And as I said, even then we've discounted it by 80 to 90% on average vehicles. One thing I'll just finally, before I do sort of wrap up, I did have a couple of things that I wanted to sort of just specifically respond to in relation to sort of the written reputation. But I've also noticed as well, and sorry, I'm not trying to make this a political conversation, because I think it's much more than that. But I also do think that there is a bit of, disingenuous sort of, I guess, unholy alliance between a Green Party who claims to care about tackling the climate emergency and reducing carbon emissions in the borough. And then obviously you've got the Hackney Conservative councillors who obviously are very much climate denying.
If I can just come in, if this isn't the space for political comments.
No, it's not. I just wanted to reinforce one thing from Councillor Bill Lubbock's own manifesto in relation to the Green Party, because I think it's really important for transparency.
Councillor Coven, I think we're, I think we've heard the point. Thank you.
Okay. But look, in order to wrap up, I think, as I said, I think the representations in Councillor Bill Lubbock's claims are very misinformed. I think I'm not sure if they've had the opportunity to actually go through the proposals and policies, see what changes we've actually made. Anything you do further than this means that you don't agree with an emissions-based charging model, and I think you need to come clear about whether you support an emissions-based charging model or not.
Councillor Coven, thank you very much. Councillor Billy Lubbock, I think I'll just let you briefly come in now.
Chair,
I don't think we're not having interruptions of different people.
So can I quickly just ask officers to sort of touch base on some of the specifics as well, because I think Michael wanted to.
Just to be clear, Councillor Coven, I'm just letting Councillor Billy Lubbock come in on one specific point he's raised. I'm not having a to and fro between the two of you. And I will make a judgment about whether it's an appropriate point once you said it, and then we'll go over to officers. Does that sound okay? Yeah, so, okay, Councillor Benny-Levick.
Just on the emissions-based charging model, that doesn't apply to commuter parking. Short stay parking would be the same as for cars. It's a flat rate.
So, yeah, I'll probably actually, Councillor Benny-Levick has made a point of correction, which I think I'll hand over to officers. I'm just going to really sort of ask, I mean, we are sort of, we obviously tight for time, but I mean, maybe if officers could come in on sort of outstanding points that have been covered by Councillor Coburn, and particularly that last point by Councillor Benny-Levick. I don't know who wants to start.
So in the interest of time, Chair, I'll hand over to Kevin, and Mike will do the cover off on the specifics.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we're prepared obviously on the basis of the grounds that were set out and responses to that. So, and also the points that we noted that that you've raised just a moment ago. So, hand over to Mike.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, in relation to, I think, the points that have been made in relation to how the cabinet paper is alleged not to fit with the council's constitution. If I can spend a few minutes just addressing the areas of concern, and then deal specifically with the points that you want more detail on.
Yeah, in the interest of fairness, we gave Councillor Benny-Levick had obviously 10 minutes to make his first presentation. So although there are a number of points to respond to, I'd like to try and make it as brief as possible, so that we've got sufficient time for discussion. But I do appreciate there are a lot of points to respond to, so we're trying to give equal time to both points of view. But thank you very much. So you could carry on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So firstly, in relation to the plans and the desired aims being insufficiently clear, I think as Councillor Coburn has made clear, we're very clear that our goal is to reduce CO2 emissions and improve air quality, and that in order to achieve that, we need to have the right pricing structures in place to ensure that we're able to incentivise people to walk, cycle and take public transport more in terms of the wider hierarchy that we want to see people prioritising in terms of how they move around within the borough. And as Councillor Coburn said, historically the way that we've managed motorcycle parking within Hackney hasn't been in line with that for practical reasons, primarily that we haven't been able to display physical permits and short stay parking sessions on bikes because there wasn't anywhere to affix those. But with the advent of electronic permits and electronic short stay parking, we're now able to move forward with plans which we believe, moving on to the second point, are proportionate. So as Councillor Coburn's talked about, the principle of emissions-based charging is one that is helping reduce CO2 emissions and improving air quality in Hackney at present. The best example we have at present is the fourfold reduction, the reduction by a third of diesel vehicles that we've seen within Hackney over the course of the last 4 years. And the principle of emissions-based charging is one that it's critical we roll out to all forms of parking within Hackney. We recognise that on average, motorcycles and mopeds and other forms of powered two-wheelers emit less than larger, heavier, more polluting vehicles. But the principle and structure of our 13-band charging we're introducing, following the same model that's used by the DVLA for road tax, is one that will ensure that there is proportionality with charging based on tailpipe emissions and tailpipe emissions alone. In relation to short stay parking, historically we have had a flat rate charge based on demand within the area. So the highest charge is typically in the south of the borough, with lower charges in in areas where there's lower demand. But since we had approved by Cabinet in November last year our new parking and enforcement plan, in which we committed to a significant reduction in short stay parking, we have rolled out as of the 3rd of April, so a few weeks ago, a new charging structure whereby we will charge based on a combination of how much demand there is for parking in a particular area, but also how the vehicles parking in that location are charged. So that will see a discounted price for zero emissions vehicles, petrol vehicles being charged at £1 an hour extra, diesel vehicles £1 an hour surcharge on top of that, and all other older vehicles, which are typically most polluting, being charged more in addition. Now, in relation to motorcycles and and mopeds, we have, as Councillor Coburn's talked about, listened to campaigners who've provided a lot of very valuable feedback on these points. And as a result, the proposals that we put forward that were agreed at Cabinet in March will see motorcyclists parking in their space being charged 5 times less after a 3-year implementation has concluded. And it will be significantly reduced in terms of charges before that. And that for electric bikes, where campaigners have made some very compelling points about the proportional impact of electric motorcycles, which is obviously a growing area in terms of the number of bikes that are now available on the market, that we more heavily discount those. So they'll be charged only 1/10 the price of electric cars parking on Hackney streets, which we think is very, very proportionate indeed in respect to charges. On the development of the plans and the openness with which we've done so, I think Councillor Coburn covered those in respect of his earlier answer. We've had over 12,000 people across 2 different consultations who fed into these plans, and we've continued to listen and take on board feedback and have changed the approach as a result of that feedback along the way. In respect of how the plans fit with the Council's policy frameworks, the list of policy frameworks to which this fits within is extremely long, and I won't list them all. But the Parking Enforcement Plan, which was approved last autumn, Hackney's Transport Strategy, our Air Quality Action Plan, our Sustainable Community Transport Strategy, and the London Mayor's Transport Strategy all support and are working towards ensuring we have the right incentives in place to help everyone to move to the greenest forms of transport that we can. And we believe our plans firmly sit within that. In respect of the budgetary considerations, the changes that we've brought forward are budgeted for, and we've committed that they will be met from parking's existing budgets with no additional budget required to implement these changes. I think the point was raised earlier on in relation to the number of additional solar motorcycle bays that would need to be introduced. But in truth, we think it's difficult to envisage that through the introduction of charges, that we're going to see something in the region of a 6-fold growth in demand for short stay parking for solar motorcycles compared to existing levels. The vast majority of demand for short stay parking for motorcycles and mopeds has always historically been in the south of the borough, where we already have bays in place. We're very open to putting in new bays where there is demand to do so, because we're not looking to ensure that large parts of the borough have no options for all-day parking available, and we've committed to that. But we don't recognise the figures that are being quoted in respect of the additional budgetary costs that the council will incur as a result of these changes. Finally, in relation to the decision being in the interest of the borough's residents, Hackney Council is firmly committed to tackling the climate emergency and improving air quality, as Councillor Chovan has talked about. Transport is now the #1 source of CO2 emissions within the UK. And we all know about the challenges that Hackney has in terms of air quality, with some of the poorest air quality in parts of the borough of anywhere in London. 7 in 10 Hackney residents don't own any form of vehicle, whether motorcycle, moped or car, but they suffer the effects of air pollution. And for the last, and whilst we've made good progress, and I've talked about the improvements we've made in the reduction on diesel vehicles, until we have a set of charges and approach towards parking which is inclusive of all forms of private transport on Hackney streets, we are never going to be able to holistically address the challenges that we've discussed today. We believe that these proposals provide the right framework to support residents and businesses, particularly for those whom their bike is a tool of trade, and I'll come on to talk about that a little bit more, whilst ensuring that we've got the right incentives in place to encourage commuters about more sustainable forms of transport wherever possible. With your permission, Chair, if I can address the additional points that you specifically referenced. So firstly, in relation to couriers, we have been working extensively with couriers and unions supporting couriers, primarily around the Dalston area, as we look to try and address some of the challenges they've had around lack of facilities and insufficient numbers of parking bays to support them in being able to park and wait for orders or take breaks between making deliveries. And we've made significant progress. We've extended the the weighting restrictions that we've got to enable them to be able to park there. And that is indicative of the approach that we will continue to take wherever there is demand for those who, as I mentioned, rely on their mopeds and motorcycles as a tool of trade, to support them without incurring significant additional costs on them. In respect of the costs borne by commuters, I don't know if you've had a look at the cabinet paper, which spells out how those charges break down across the various different areas that we've got. I mentioned a short while ago that our aim is to ensure we have the right pricing structure in place to ensure that for those who travelling by public transport, walking or cycling is an option, that we have the right pricing incentives to make that the most cost-effective option. And if you look at the proposals we've set out, we estimate that if you're going to work 20 days a week within the borough and you're going to commute in and park 8 hours a day, using a petrol motorbike, that will be a cost of £160 in our highest cost bays. That compares very favourably to a zone 1 and 2. £160 a month. That compares very favourably to a zone 1 and 2 travel card at £156 30p. And for those who can and want to take a more greener and zero emissions option in terms of moving towards fully electric motorcycles, we've listened to campaigners in terms of their concerns around us insufficiently incentivising the growth of electric motorcycles by heavily discounting. So the highest fee that could be paid will only be 40p per hour, which, if you're travelling in every single day into Hackney, will save you in the region, depending on how many hours you're working, how many days a week you're within the borough, something in the region of £1,000 to £1,200 a year if you're coming in and working in Hackney 5 days a week. So we really believe that the set of prices and the way that they're structured across the different types of vehicles or different types of motorcycles and how they're currently fueled will provide the right set of incentives to help people, together with a 3-year phase of implementation, to make the right change for them. So whether you're somebody who can't legitimately commute in through any other means, you've got 3 years to be able to look at the option of moving towards an electric bike, still have the ability to travel in and do so, and to do so at significantly lower cost than travelling with conventionally fueled motorcycles. For those who are travelling from closer in and where public transport is an alternative option, we believe that the pricing incentives we've got in place with a phased transition to ensure that there's no cliff edge to this will provide the right set of incentives to help ensure that as many people as possible can move to the most sustainable forms of transport that are available to them.
Are you confident there'll be sufficient bays available to meet demand?
Yeah, so we've committed to installing additional solar motorcycle bays where there is demand. Obviously, demand is going to change when charges are implemented, so it's something which we're going to be monitoring, but we'll be setting up something on our website to enable requests for new solar motorcycle bays to be implemented across the borough, and where there's sufficient demand for those, we will look to install them so that we are catering for the many different needs there are from in the local community and for those who are travelling in to work within Hackney.
Thank you. I'm now going to proceed to the discussion phase, where myself and colleagues have the opportunity of asking questions, both of the petitioner and also the officers. I'm going to start off with a question about whether there's anything in place for the operation of this decision to be reviewed in line with Hackney's fees and charges policy, and how you would envisage any such review taking place and when it would happen and what would be taken into consideration.
So parking charges are reviewed annually through the fees and charges, as you've just referenced. In respect of the monitoring of the impact of this, with the introduction of permits, where we propose that for residents and for businesses there will be no charge within the first year, and that for short stay parking we will use the first couple of years to really understand current levels of demand, how that is changing, and obviously to listen to feedback around requests for additional facilities within particular areas to meet demand. And there remains the option for future changes in relation to the charging structure, where as and when a need for a diversion away from the current proposals is required. So we will be actively keeping very close tabs on how demand changes, and we'll obviously liaise with our lead member and the cabinet if further changes are necessary to adapt to circumstances on the ground and the feedback we received.
Colleagues, Councillor Hayhurst.
So, thank you, Michael. So, if I understand, it's page 72, which gives the charges for the solo motorcycle bays, the hourly charges and the monthly cost, and and this seems to be the significant bone of contention. But how then have the petitioners got to the 2,300 a year figure at 2.1 Roman numeral 2? About saying that's what it would cost for zones A and B. I can't see how, looking at page 72 and the charges there, how are they getting to that figure?
That's a question for me.
Yeah, I'm going to, yeah.
So yeah, the campaigners who deny that they have actually been listened to, they said they did not see the full pricing structure until the documents for cabinet were released, despite the fact that they were told that they would have it shared with them before the meeting and continue to take feedback. But that particular number they reached because the council's estimate is based on an 8-hour park, whereas the campaigner's estimate is based on a 10-hour park because it takes time to arrive to your place of work. You know, you might not leave immediately. You know, something you might need to get changed. If you've got your bike gear on, you need to lock up, all those kinds of things.
If we go to page 72, then you just explain still how the calculation works. If you go to page 72, I still don't understand how the calculation.
The calculations work based on an 8-hour day, 20 days a month.
Which line item are you looking at?
4.3.64.
And so, which of the, are you talking about a diesel vehicle? Are you talking?
No, I think we're both talking about the high demand area for petrol powered two-wheelers registered from 2005.
So the 160
in high demand areas, which is basically where all of the bays are. So this is main. That's the main. That's what most of the vehicles will be, and in where they will mostly be parked. But even if we're talking about the council's estimate, it's still 10 to 20 times any other parking charge in London.
But then what
and it's not emissions based.
But what is wrong with, in principle, because obviously the whole process is trying to encourage people to move towards zero emissions.
Yeah.
So what is wrong with this gradiated approach to try and move people down towards the £64? That's what, presumably that is more preferable because that's less emissions. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, I think it's just that there's too much stick and hardly any carrot here, because the costs here are only talking about parking charges, and yet they're saying that it's cheaper to travel by public transportation than to travel by a powered two-wheeler. That doesn't take into account any of the other costs associated with running, insuring a powered two-wheeler. So it's already this number is already lower than actual costs. And then also, if we want to incentivize people down the hierarchy, get people out of cars into powered two-wheelers, then we need to incentivize that as well. I mean, we completely agree with reducing CO2 emissions, the right pricing for cars, incentivizing people out of cars. We think the parking framework for cars is great. I commend that. I can't speak for everyone who's done the call-in, but myself and Councillor Garbutt definitely do. We do not see how you follow the same logic, and the modelling isn't there for this decision for the basis of powered two-wheelers. We're not against emissions-based charging, but as we've also seen, electric vehicles are going to be charged as well for parking permits, and that's not based on just on their emissions. So it strikes us as this plan which benefits and is subsidising residents who can afford electric vehicles and harms those less well-off residents, quite a lot of whom use powered two-wheelers for their work.
I'll allow you one more follow-up, and then I think Councillor Coburn wants to come in.
But I'm still saying, but do you agree with the principle that if you're looking on page 72, it is gradiated from the £64 for zero emissions powered two-wheelers, and it's gradiated upwards. So there is a gradient on emissions in principle, isn't it?
There is a gradient there, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn, I think you wanted to come in briefly, and then I'll let colleagues come in.
Yeah, it's just a point of clarification. I think Councillor Bill Lubbock has said that the campaigners didn't have sight of the pricing charges. I think just to assure members, I'll have to dig up the date of the meeting, but myself, the mayor, officers had met with, and plus GMB Union had met with the campaigners. I believe it was in January. I may be wrong if the officers want to correct me, where we actually spoke about what they would like to see in response to. So after we committed to reviewing the charges, we met in I think it was in January or late December, and we spoke about what they would like to see. In that meeting, we presented them with the site of the new pricing structure, which included what we're bringing forward today and some options. And then on the back of that, officers have been working with the campaigners. They've had countless meetings to the point where we got it to cabinet in March. I just wanted to, as a point of clarification, I think I just wanted to really sort of highlight that those were presented to the campaigners.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. I think Councillor Potter wants to come in with a question.
It was more a comment, really. I do find it hard to see why, as a result of this policy, commuters would start to use their cars to commute, because by the same logic that obviously the cost of buying a bike and petrol, etc., is the same for cars, so it's going to be much more expensive to run and park a car. So that, I mean, just one comment, that logic doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that point if you were talking about all day car commuting. But some people might use that for small trips. They might use a car for business meetings where they can stay for the shorter stay periods. But it's not just about getting people, about people who will go from motorbike to car. It's also about trying to get people to go from those higher polluting vehicles, the cars, and down to motorbikes. So what we don't really understand is in the modelling it says it's five times less charging or whatever. How is that differential being calculated? What is the modelling, and what is the proportion of air quality attributable to motorcycles? And is it something like 40%? Because if not, why are we predicting a 70% reduction in motorbike parking and short stay parking, and aiming for only a 30% of overall short stay parking? Now it seems disproportionate to me, and I think the real issue here is the risk of making a wrong decision right now is too great because of the potential impacts on workers, people who have to make big changes to their lives and the way that they live. I think it'd be quite a surprise to a lot of people who live in car-free properties to suddenly find that they can't even park their powered to vehicle, even if it's an electric vehicle. Even if it's an electric powered to vehicle, there's nothing in the plans that means they can do that. And it's also the monitoring is not clear, and there are no KPIs to indicate whether or not this plan is going to be a success. And you say we can change it down the line, but how do we know on what basis we would change it?
Can we,
Yes, a number of points obviously that have been raised. Firstly, in relation to the levels of engagement, as Councillor Coburn talked about, we did share the proposals in an initial draft form in relation to a discounted pricing for short stay parking. We took on board feedback from campaigners around the levels of charges and also how those were structured, particularly around electric vehicles. There still will be, once this, subject to obviously what's agreed at today's meeting, there will still be a statutory consultation, which is a formal part of the advertising of any changes for changes in how we manage parking on street, that will provide a further opportunity for input. In relation to, I want to pick up on what Councillor Potter mentioned in relation to the perceived risk of people riding motorbikes or mopeds moving towards other forms of vehicle as an alternative. We don't believe that is realistic, because in practice we have maximum 4-hour stay restrictions across the whole of Hackney for cars. So if you were minded to do so, you wouldn't be able to park all day and commute in by car. Obviously, many people choose motorcycles and mopeds because of the speed with which they can travel through the traffic, and obviously there would be a significant slowing in most people's journeys if they were to move to cars. And in addition, they would pay between 5 and 10 times as much, depending on what type of vehicle they would be driving. So we don't think it's realistic that we'll see that kind of change. In respect of, I think Councillor Vinnie Lovett mentioned about the desirability of moving people from cars to motorbikes. I would argue that we are beyond that stage anyway. We don't provide or cater for people commuting by car, and we haven't done for many years. And that the vast majority of people who live and work in Hackney travel by public transport. And if anything, we're trying to go the other way in respect of ensuring that commuting, which is something which is, in terms of council policy, parking policy, we have not supported and actively catered for the best part of a decade, that we are trying to take steps to ensure that we're introducing a set of charges that takes what's currently a very popular form of transport by riders to a point where we've got the right incentives in place. So we're not putting in place an arbitrary ban on commuting, but that we are ensuring we've got the right pricing incentives in place so that people who, as I talked about earlier on, still need to be able to ride in, can do so, and ideally will do so on electric motorcycles in years to come. But for those who have other alternatives, public transport, the preferable, well, public transport, walking or cycling are the preferable and cheaper alternatives in the long run, which sits very squarely within the council's wider hierarchy of how we want to support people towards active and sustainable travel, and we believe is the right approach.
Thank you very much. I've just got well, I've got a couple of other questions and one comment. I know, David, I can see that you want to come in. I'm probably going to give you a chance a little bit later, unless it's an immediate comment on those points. Yeah, but just firstly, I think we do need to know a little bit more about the financial modelling, which is obviously sort of a key part of this challenge, about how much detail you have, you've calculated in relation to how, the basis of these calculations about how the fees, generated by this new business will feed into new parking bays. Is there any more detail you can give us in relation to this, or how confident you are about
in relation to the costing calculations, we have within the cabinet paper modelled our estimates in relation to income. I do want to stress that this is not the estimates which relate to a 70% reduction in commuting are neither a target nor an expectation of what we believe will happen, but it's just an indicative sense of the income that may be generated from these proposals. So the implementation of that and the income that we've generated will be phased in over a 3-year with cost heavily or income heavily weighted towards the back end of that period. But in relation to the costs, we've estimated we're looking at about £150,000 in relation to the implementation of additional security measures, because obviously, bike theft has been a real problem within Hackney for a number of years, and we want to make sure that in addition to ensuring we're creating the right environment to incentivise people to go green wherever possible, that we're also investing in ensuring that we're improving security measures where the demand still remains in place by putting in place those additional security points for people to be able to lock their bikes to them. So in balance, if you look at the cabinet paper, it sets out that the income is anticipated to cover those additional costs over the early years as we expand the number of bays and introduce those security measures. So we're very confident that this isn't going to cause a budgetary commitment that we're not able to meet through the income we generate through both this scheme but also parking more widely.
How do you propose to evaluate, if this decision goes ahead, the impact on air quality? What modelling is going to be done in relation to that?
Well, so in relation to air quality, obviously Hackney's got a growing number of air monitoring stations of various different types across Hackney. But it's important to emphasise that this is one element in terms of a much wider change that we're implementing across Hackney at the same time. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that we'll be able to individually say that we can attribute reduction in motorcycles solely to improvements in air quality, because I've already talked about the changes in short stay parking pricing, which we've already introduced and has been in place for the last 3 weeks, which we're aiming to lead to a reduction in short stay parking sessions by 30% by 2026. We have 1.1 million short stay parking sessions every single year, which gives an idea of the scale that we have in place. We're introducing variable visitor voucher pricing, where for households who buy very high levels of visitor vouchers, because they maybe want to park a second car on the street, or because maybe they're using those vouchers to sell on to other people to park in their area, the prices will be increasing for those who find very high numbers. That will reduce demand for those, and again see a reduction in the number of vehicle movements within Hackney. And then we have the 13-band charging structure that Councillor Hayhurst was mentioning, which will ensure that the vehicles that are the most polluting on Hackney streets, we're strengthening the set of pricing disincentives so that for those who drive those vehicles, we see a faster reduction in the number of those vehicles that are on Hackney Street. So collectively, all these changes will have a significant impact upon local air quality, together with fulfilling our commitments to reduce CO2 emissions as we tackle the climate emergency. As I mentioned, transport is now the #1 source of CO2 emissions in the UK. So we aren't going to be able to isolate it solely down to motorcycles, mopeds and other forms of powered two-wheelers, but it's really important that if we are going to fulfil council's ambitions, that we look holistically at all forms of private transport on Hackney's roads and ensure we've got a proportionate set of charges in place that help us to incentivise the right sorts of behaviours in future.
Thank you. One more question from me, then I notice my colleague Councillor Hayhurst wants to come in, my colleague Councillor Conway, and then I think we're going to be sort of drawing this matter to a conclusion. I mean, people can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding really of this call-in is that it's particularly focused on the impact on people commuting to work in Hackney. So I just really want to know a bit more, well, maybe from both sides, as it were, in relation to the characteristics of these people who are commuting, where they work, who they are, what sort of jobs they're doing, and what sort of areas the borough are impacted. I mean, I do understand there is also, other groups who are going to be impacted in, particular, householders who, residents in Hackney who use powered two-wheelers, and also, couriers. But I think we've been satisfied really sort of responses about that. I do take your point in relation to car-free developments, but I think this is particularly focused on the needs of communities. So I really want to know a little bit more about this population, what we know in terms of sort of equality impact about them, where they're working. Are they working in Hackney? Are they from Hackney? Or are they sort of, working in other areas? Do they go to work 5 days a week? Those sort of things. Are there any data on that?
So, owing to the fact that obviously at present we don't have parking charges nor a requirement for motorcyclists to have to purchase a parking session to park across the vast majority of the borough, we don't have hard data in terms of how many people are coming from where to park, how often. What we do know is that the vast majority of demand for commuter parking is down in the south of the borough, so primarily in Shoreditch and Hoxton, where we have the vast majority of the short stay parking bays that cater for people who are travelling in by motorcycle and moped to be able to park and commute to work in the city fringes, and obviously in those particular wards. In respect of commuting more widely, I think it's really important to just highlight that we draw a very clear distinction in terms of our hierarchy of road use between those who are at the top of our hierarchy, so blue badge holders, those who rely on their vehicle to be able to get out and about in the community, access local services through residents, to businesses, to visitors who are coming to play an active part in Hackney's economy. Commuting, per se, is something which doesn't feature within our hierarchy of road use because it's something I mentioned we haven't facilitated within Hackney for other forms of private transportation for well over a decade. And whilst we fully recognise that many businesses, including we talk about couriers and delivery riders, rely on their motorcycle as a tool of trade, and through business permits, which we will be making available to motorcyclists, together with the amendments we've made to support couriers and delivery riders, we believe we've got the right set of measures in place to help ensure that the business of Hackney continues to operate effectively. But in regard to commuting, we estimate there's about 1,000 bikes come and park within Hackney every single day. I had a quick look at the census earlier on. We've got about 179,000 economically active people within Hackney. So somewhere between 0.25 and 0.5% of people working in Hackney on any given day may be travelling in by motorcycle or moped based on our best estimates. So the impact of these proposals, I don't believe are going to have a demonstrable impact upon Hackney's wider economy. And I think the range of measures that I've already referenced earlier will give plenty of options for those individuals who I'm not going to generalise on in terms of who they are, where they're travelling from, and how often, to find the right solution that works for them based on their own particular personal circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to come in on that one, Councillor Billy?
Yeah, I just want to make the point, this is not party political, this is about people's lives and livelihoods. So we can't just think about these as vehicles, there are people behind them. I appreciate that officers have done a lot of hard work, but I think there's 4 key points we failed to address on this. There is going to be an immediate ban on zones without short stay parking, and we don't know how many bays will go in.
We'll have another opportunity to sum up.
Right.
So, yeah.
I'll say some of that, but yeah, well, as we've heard, there've been no equalities impacts assessment in terms of the ethnicity as a protected characteristic. That's not been considered, especially for courier riders. We haven't considered that as a particular group that needs supporting in this way. And there's been no clear modelling on the impact of that, no hard data. And, that also goes for the impact on air quality. We haven't had a model on what the impact of this will be.
Thank you. Councillor Hayhurst and Councillor Conway, and then we'll move to summing up.
Just on the sort of the gig economy career rights points, as I understand it, so what sort of extra cost are we anticipating for that cohort of industries? I think I saw somewhere in the papers about a 20-minute, in some areas, a 20-minute. So for those that are on their breaks, a 20-minute sort of free stay. So are we anticipating? I'm just trying to work out. So if someone's coming in from outside the borough, if they're breaks under 20 minutes, there might not, and they're in certain areas, there might not necessarily be an extra cost, or what, or how are you?
Correct. So if you're somebody who works in the gig economy at present and you're a Hackney resident, and obviously you're a resident permit fee, which for the majority of motorcycles, not exclusively, because there are some high-powered, higher emitting motorcycles that will fall into a similar sort of range in terms of their emissions as small and medium-sized cars, but the majority will fall into the lower bands, which typically will be seeing a price of between £65 and £75 per year.
That's the resident.
That's the resident. So if you're a resident, you obviously need to pay that fee. Those fees can either be paid annually as a total lump sum, or you can buy them in 3-month increments where the price is only a third the amount. So in terms of cash flow, there's a facility. In terms of then actually being at work, yeah.
So those at work that are not residents, say if they just live on the other side of the border, or
indeed, whatever local charging regime is there will determine charge for having their bike on street. But in terms of being at work, yes, so we will be looking, and as I talked about earlier on, building upon the approach we've taken within Dalston, whereby we look to work with delivery riders and gig economy workers to look at what they need within specific localities where we've got real hubs with a lot of demand for food delivery because of the volume of restaurants, and ensuring we're trying to provide the right level of waiting restrictions so that there's sufficient numbers of bays to enable them to park up, to collect deliveries, wait deliveries, take a break without incurring significant additional costs for those who we know obviously are some of the lower earners within Hackney, and who we don't want to see these proposals end up having the unintended implications, of driving up their costs of operating within Hackney.
So how are you going to monitor that in terms of sort of somebody, I don't know, if they're rocking up outside Pizza Hut to pick up something, are they going to be charged a 40p an hour wait at the moment, or is it how?
So already, if you are loading and unloading, you have what's called a statutory, what the word is, statutory exemption for to enable you to collect something, make a delivery without having to pay to park. So whether you are, dropping something off at friend or family members, or you're making a delivery of a takeaway, you're covered and there'll be no additional charges. So it's only where there is prolonged waiting in particular locations that there is any form of risk. But we've already got strong established working relationships with the unions representing couriers, and so we will continue to have conversations with them as we work towards implementation of these plans to look at any other areas within the borough that may need to have a similar approach introduced to ease the implementation of this without having consequences for gig economy workers, because that isn't what we're looking to do here.
Councillor Conway and Councillor Potter, and then we'll come to the end of the.
Thank you. I think Councillor Hay have asked most of my questions actually. I had another question which was probably to ask bit of Councillor Binny Lubbock, but also Michael around Councillor Binny Lubbock. You said that you were looking at the modelling that you were looking at was like a 10-hour stay. I'm just sort of wondering how we've arrived at that, because it feels like that's quite a stretch to have an additional 2 hours added onto a working day, especially if we're looking at a bit of an average where you would have part-time workers who might work fewer hours. You might have, you know, somebody like me who, because of childcare responsibilities, has to be arrive at work on the button and then leave afterwards, as well as people who work 12 hours. I'm wondering how you've arrived at
if you work an 8-hour day, then you do need to get into work and out of work, so you'll be
not an hour early and an hour late.
But if you're 5 minutes over, that counts as an extra hour, doesn't it?
Is that the case?
It's not done by the minute, is it? It's per hour.
No, so you can book sessions beyond 2 hours by the minute. So obviously, you know, there's flexibility for riders to select the right amount of time based on how long they're going to work for. There's also the ability to extend sessions if you're going to be kept at work for an unexpectedly long period of time.
So in which case that figure would look considerably different if we were to base it on an 8-hour day, which I think is still being fairly generous, given that we know in the current climate, actually.
But there are some situations, quite a lot of situations, especially, you know, if you need to get changed from being in if you come off a wet motorcycle from the rain, you need to get changed, dry off, get yourself ready. You might also have, you know, work socialising. You might not have kids that you need to run off to afterwards. I think that figure is still very high, and you know, if you compare it with other boroughs, it's significantly higher.
And I just wondered, from the council's perspective, do we understand? I'm guessing that your answer to this would be no, based on what one of the answers to the previous question was. But do we know the sort of length of stay that motorcycles are coming into the borough? Like, what does that look like? Has there been any sort of?
We did an initial survey back in 2019 to understand where the demands, where there was demand for motorcycle parking within Hackney, to get a sense of the number of bikes parking and where. But you know, I think, as Councillor Binny Lubbock has already referenced, you know, the majority of the demand within Selham motorcycle base is from people who are commuting for, in most cases, I believe a full working day, but obviously in other cases it may be for meetings or for other periods of time. But the demand to travel in and commute for whatever purpose is what we're obviously looking to try and address in respect of the charge structure that I've tried to explain.
I'll just make a very quick point. I think it's worth recognising that, particularly in a post-pandemic world, people are working more flexibly than ever. So the point, you could literally take any average and make an assumption about, you know, the hours being worked, and it's just a very difficult point to pin down. So I think it's just worth, you know, providing a bit of additional context as well. And then in addition to that, Michael alluded earlier to the areas of most demand in the borough being in the south, you know, right on the city fringe. So again, you know, we talk about the impact on the economy of businesses and you know, those commuting in. The data and the analysis can only take us so far. We don't know how many people are, for example, you know, parking in Hackney and, you know, who work in the city or work elsewhere. So, you know, I take the point around, you know, the modelling and the detailed work that needs to back some of the stuff, but I think those are points of additional context are worth bearing in mind.
That's helpful.
Can I ask a quick question in just relation to that point, to Councillor Lubbock?
Yeah, very briefly, then we're going to just move on to the final question and then on to something else. Thank you.
So I just wanted to I mean, I'm just out of curiosity to Councillor Lubbock, you mentioned obviously that the 20 other boroughs also that obviously have a cheaper model.
No.
Can you talk about those 20 other boroughs? So which boroughs are you referring to? Because there is a lot of
you've misheard. Sorry, you've misheard. It's not that it's 20 other boroughs that it costs more than. It's 10 to 20 times more expensive than the other boroughs that have any parking charges at all. Most of the other boroughs don't have any parking charges, so obviously it's much higher than 10 to 20 times.
Can you name which boroughs those are and what the pricing models are in those boroughs? Like each, I know the Westminster one, but can you name the other ones with the pricing models?
I did mention them in my opening speech, or at least some of them. I haven't got all of them to hand, but I have been assured that that is the case. Let me just have a quick look at my previous statement. I mean, there's probably people in the room who could answer this better than I, but there are models in Westminster, Lewisham, Islington. Yeah, so.
Do you know what those models in Islington are?
We've got, I don't know, I've mentioned around the 301 bays in Camden, which are free to use, and Westminster has over 400 with a yearly permit of £100. I think they're £1 each.
Very
Yeah.
Sorry.
Please.
We have just introduced a charge of £1 a day, and we're actually working with them to put in place the reduced block booking, so it will be the same expense.
Yeah, so that's sorry, so that's £1 a day across the board.
It's £1 a day, but then it will also be a reduced price of £100 a year. So that will be a reduced price of £100 a year. They allow block booking and they allow reduced prices of spot booking on a weekly, monthly, and yearly basis.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments from officers on that?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't consider moving to a Westminster council style model of charging because, in the views of officers, we believe that a £1 a day charge was wholly insufficient to encourage the kind of change that we want to see within Hackney in terms of modal shift away from the use of combustion engined motorcycles and mopeds towards more sustainable forms of transportation. And our view is that the Westminster model is one that is really aimed squarely at managing motorcycle parking in a controlled way, ensuring the right incentives are in place to ensure that motorcycles park in solar motorcycle bays in a way that minimises or makes best use of curbside space. Obviously, in a borough which has got a lot of demands on its limited parking on street, but that the ambitions and the policies which the proposals we set out here tonight are aimed at something quite different, which is.
Sorry, just a second. Can you please?
Are aimed at something quite different, which is.
Yeah, so just a second, I'm chairing this meeting. I'm very happy for you to speak. You need to speak through me. So it's in my discretion about whether you speak. So that's the, I was actually about to ask a similar follow-up question really in relation to the Islington model, because I'd like to know that. I mean, I think, the ladies just described, as I understood it, an emerging model in Islington, which is obviously, comparable statistical neighbour to Hackney, with a residential borough with boundaries on the city. I just wonder whether you got any comments on that model.
Yes, I mean the same comments in relation to Westminster, which is a £1 a day charge is not going to incentivise the kind of modal shifts that within Hackney we want to achieve as part of our very ambitious programme to reduce CO2 emissions, tackle the climate emergency, and improve air quality. As part of the wider package of measures already referenced in relation to all the changes we're making affecting drivers of cars within the borough. So the rationale behind the charges, the structures we've put in place are aimed squarely at supporting the delivery of those ambitions and align wholeheartedly with the policies which we have in place, which is obviously one of the key things which has been referenced in tonight's conversation in relation to the fact that our proposals we've set out here are not supported by our policies.
Okay, very much. I'm just going to very briefly ask let Councillor Benny-Love ask a final question. If one of the campaigners wants to come in, you can come, one person can come in briefly. I want you to give your name and say which organisation you represent as well, so we've got the records, and then we're going to draw this bit of it to a conclusion. There's one final question from Councillor Potter. I can see you want to speak as well, Councillor Steinberger, but
It's a very quick question about proportionality. If the council's aim over the period is to reduce short stay parking of all modes by 30%, but it predicts that this plan will reduce short stay parking by motorcycles by 70%, how have you come to the conclusion that the incentives are correct to achieve your policy aim?
So I think the short stay parking objectives reduced by 30%, we've got to put it in the context of our wider hierarchy of parking use. So the vast majority of short stay parking demand there currently is within Hackney is from people that are travelling to park and visit shops, play an active part in Hackney's local community. And we have very, very little demand at all from people who may seek to commute and use short stay parking, which is the way that we've designed the operation of our short stay parking bays, because as I've already referenced on a couple of occasions, commuting is at the very, very bottom of our parking hierarchy. So we purposefully want to see visitors prioritised over commuting. And so fitting within that hierarchy, we want to see commuting reduced at a faster and greater rate than the broader reductions within short stay parking that I've referenced with that 30% target. But as I said at the beginning of the meeting, the 70% is there to provide estimates around potential income, making some assumptions about around the reductions that could be potentially seen, but it's not a target and it's not a goal. It's something that we will obviously monitor in real time in terms of how much that demand changes over time. But I'm not going to pretend that our aim is not to reduce commuting by powered two-wheelers. As we take further steps to build on the reductions in commuting we've achieved through all of the various different parking restrictions we've got in place that's driven down car use over recent years.
Thank you very much. We're going to draw this to a close. Councillor Potter, if anyone, I'm the only basis I'm going to let anybody come in is that got anything that hasn't been said before, because I think we're getting this conversation getting a bit repetitive. The gentleman there, can you please give your name and which organisation you represent?
Of course, I'm Ben Pearson from Save London Motorcycle. I'd like to make a few points of clarification, I think, because I think there's been some.
Well, I mean, I'm not having a speech. It's just questions. It's just questions. Councillor Benny-Love, Councillor speaking for you. So I'm not having a lot of points of clarification. There's points that haven't been made before.
Yeah. So the Islington model has been mentioned. I'd also point out that the statement of reasons for Islington's website Hartland is exactly the same reasons that Hackney. They want to tackle the climate emergency. They want to reduce commuting, and they want to improve air quality. I'd also like to, there's been a lot of discussion around this, whether it's 2,300 or 1,960 as the council estimate. And I think that's really missing the point. It's still 20 times more than Islington or Westminster, the boroughs that the borough have. And there's been a lot of confusion around this idea that the council wants to tackle commuting. The council has clearly stated that PTW commuting is a legitimate commuting mode. Now, I haven't heard an answer to the question: is it being banned or is it not being banned? There's just been barrier.
I think we have heard an answer to the question that commuting is not being banned. So I mean, I'm content with that.
There's no provision. There's parking. The council doesn't know how many people are parking in these areas. The council can say that they will put in days if there's demand, but the council has the statutory responsibility to provide suitable amount for parking, not provide the form on the website where people can request suitable amount for parking if the council accepts their request.
No, that's a helpful comment in relation to statutory responsibility, which I will ask for a response for, together with Councillor Potter's question that she's going to come in, and then we're going to draw matters to a close. Thank you.
I was just going to ask two brief questions. One was about commuting and the worry and fear about the amount it's going to cost, and what kind of monitoring you will do going So, 'cause as you said, you don't really know fully. You obviously you know largely where the demand is, but what monitoring and engagement you will do going forward, just to kind of see what the impact of the policy is, and that it doesn't have a detrimental impact on low-paid workers. And the other question was in terms of car-free development. What kind of communication engagement are you doing with those residents who have so far, relied on parking on, those estates and yeah, can you provide some detail on that, please?
And when you answer those questions, can you also provide a response to the point about statutory responsibility? Because we do need clarity in relation to that.
Sure. So firstly, in relation to the question around how demand changes over time. So with the implementation of charges, subject obviously to tonight's the outcome of tonight's meeting, everyone who wants to be able to park, whether it's with a car or with a motorbike or moped, will need to purchase a short-stay parking session, and obviously that will be discounted at 5 times less than the price of the equivalent cars. But what that will enable us to do is to very quickly build up a profile of who's parking, where, for how long, and as those charges over this 3-year implementation take place, how that demand changes. Is it we see the same people coming but less often because they only actually need to travel in to commute by bike once or twice a week rather than 5 times a week as they did previously, because hybrid working were a bigger part of how we operate? Is it that demand goes away entirely as people transition to public transport or other ways of travel which are more cost effective? Do we see that motorcyclists opt for electric, fully electric motorcycles because it offers a more cost effective way? So we'll be able to gather and analyse that information in near real time as we start seeing those sessions being bought, and we'll monitor that closely over the course of the next 3 years. In relation to car-free developments, we'll see the car-free covenants that we implement as part of planning policy set out that only holders of blue badges are exempt from the restriction for the issuance of any form of parking permit. So in the same way as when we expand parking zones to cover car-free developments that may have been in previously uncontrolled areas, the same thing would apply in this instance, where anyone who does have a motorcycle looking for on-street parking wouldn't be able to secure a permit. And in instances of that sort, looking for off-street parking options, whether that be within undercrofts or elsewhere on the development itself, will be the way forward, in the same way that we currently advise members of the public when they're looking for an option for parking their car.
Coming on that, I mean, I know there is, I'm sure other councillors have had this experience as well as ward councillors. It's often very challenging. I mean, particularly in Hackney, we've got developments which are partly social housing and partly private, and it's in my experience very challenging for the car parkings generally owned by the private parts of those developments for them to permit social housing tenants to access those parking spaces. I mean, I think I've had multiple instances of that as a ward council. I'm sure other councillors have the same experience. So I mean, I think it would be really helpful if there could be more cooperation really in terms of accessing that parking for social housing tenants on those joint developments, and also in Hackney Housing.
So I mean, we've worked very closely, for example, with Woodbury Down redevelopment, where a lot of the car-free covenants have only been applied to the shared ownership properties and the privately owned properties, which have the opportunity to benefit from undercroft parking off street, without those restrictions necessarily being applied to the socially rented properties within those. So we're trying to ensure that, together with our regeneration colleagues, we're able to ensure that we are able to not create the kind of difficulties that you've described with the new developments that are going on across the borough.
I think the final point in relation to statutory responsibility is to provide parking.
So in relation to parking, we provide a wide range of different parking facilities across Hackney. We've got over 20,000 shared use and paired display bays across the whole of the borough. Solar motorcycle bays are not, to my understanding, a statutory obligation to provide. You look to put them in where there is demand for them, and I've acknowledged earlier on tonight that we will absolutely look to put those in where there is demand, in order to ensure that we're catering for changes in where motorcyclists and other riders want to be able to park as a result of the implementation of these changes. But nothing that we put forward is going to mean that motorcyclists are not going to be able to park on Hackney streets in the same way that other drivers are able to at present. So I'm very confident that we don't have a problem in terms of our statutory obligations on that front.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're now going to move to the summing up stage. I'm just going to remind everyone what I said at the beginning about the range of options that we have before us as a panel, just before I invite the different parties, Councillor Benny-Levick and Councillor Coburn, to sum up. And Councillor Steinberg, I know you wanted to make a contribution as well. Would it be okay if you make that contribution at this stage? Yeah, thank you. So the options we have, we've only got 3 options under the Constitution. It's firstly to take no further action, in which case the decision will take effect immediately, or to refer the decision back to Cabinet for reconsideration, setting out the nature of the panel's concerns. The Cabinet must then reconsider the matter, taking into account the concerns of the Scrutiny Panel before making a final decision, or to refer the matter to full council if the panel considers that its recommendations would have an impact on the council's budget or policy frameworks. Those are the 3 options that we've got before us this evening. I'd also like to remind particularly Councillor Benny-Levick before he sums up that the major question that we've got to have in our minds really is whether we prefer this decision to go ahead or whether we would prefer an alternative decision to go ahead. So if you have in mind an alternative decision, I'd really like you to take the opportunity of outlining that as part of your summing up. Thank you. So I'll now invite you to sum up for around 5 minutes. And Councillor Steinberger obviously just make a comment as well.
As I mentioned before, this is not party political. This is about people's lives and livelihoods, and I appreciate officers have done a lot of work, but there are some points that I think have failed to be addressed. As we've discussed quite a lot, I think this does still count as an immediate ban on zones without short stay bays, and I think there is a cost implication to how many bays there will need to be and what are the costs overall. I think it's disproportionate, 70% reduction for a less polluting mode. Motorcycles also use shops and local amenities, and they won't be able to do that in many zones. Smaller short stay charges could address this. I think that's a big factor, and perhaps these sort of mixed bays, and I'm not entirely sure of all of those details, but I think that something like that could be put together by the panel. Yeah, I think there's a real issue around the lack of equality's impact on couriers. Ethnicity is a protected characteristic, and I'm quite surprised that this has been overlooked, considering all the good work that officers have done with local couriers. The fact that there's a 5 times less equivalent than cars for the short stay, without any particular modelling about why that 5 times factor has been reached, and how that is not also, why is that not also a factor in terms of resident parking? I guess that's a question of affordability. And we haven't seen a measure on how this will impact air quality. So these plans will also make it near impossible for couriers living in car-free developments to make a living. So, because couriers also need to be able to take more flexible, longer breaks throughout the day and night as orders come in, and what they do between orders when they aren't on the job. So yeah, my recommendation is to, it would be good to review this in more detail, maybe propose to the cabinet that the costs are disproportionate, and maybe we could take up a model similar to Westminster or one of these other places where we've seen models introduced, or find some kind of middle ground.
Thank you. Councillor Steinberger, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm particularly obviously all that the councillor said today, Councillor Binny. So, you know, I've listened to everything today and basically it's covered most of it. I'm just a little bit concerned on mainly, I'll touch on the quality impact assessment. I see a lot of things in it which either is raw or is not being addressed properly. I mean, if I start off at page 185, you don't even have a carrying on to 186, you don't even have a date of when this was done. You know, on the top there's no date, nothing. Following on, then you say to improve security for those that need to ride. I don't know what you've improved here. Then going on to what Councillor Conway mentioned, according to that, it's going to work out an average of £8 a day before you start working, pay for the council. People have to work, people have a job. But basically what we're doing is, if it works out roughly to £160, we're charging on a daily basis £8 a day for a person. Do we really think that everybody's going to be able to continue? Have we thought about people's jobs? Have we done anything about it? Have we spoken to these people to find out what they're going to do if they can't continue their job? I mean, we could be facing here big unemployment, and this could backfire also in deliveries itself. I really don't understand where the logic is in this whole thing. I'm also very concerned about page 192, religious belief. I don't believe we have looked at it properly. People, I mean, I speak for my community. People will have, until now, if they came with a motorbike, they had no problem. When it came to Sabbath, when it came to Jewish holiday, they're going to have a problem. If they live in Lordship Park, where it's all day CPZ, they're going to have a problem. You haven't addressed the issue. It's a lovely impact assessment, but it's just all writing. It hasn't been addressed, and I'm very concerned about that. And if we carry on, we spoke about it already, I still want to cover it. All those people who have been living in and the chair mentioned it also, in these car-free zones. You know, until now, they had their motorbike because there was no issue, motorbike was free. What they're going to do now? I'm very concerned generally on this whole thing, but mainly to me, the equality impact assessment is something where it's really poor, to say the least, if it's done. You know, I remember hearing from a judge talking about a Hackney's equality impact assessment, and he wasn't best pleased with it. So I want to really know if this has been done properly. I'm very concerned about the equality impact assessment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Steinberg. I'm now going to bring in Councillor Coburn just to sum up.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief, Chair. Thank you. And thanks. Sorry, I've changed device because my battery had run out on my laptop. So there's a couple of things that I just want to sort of briefly refer to without repeating a lot of what I've already said. The first thing is in the submission to bring the calling decision, and I think it's really important that members of the panel sort of really consider this, is that one of the things that he said was that the decision maker didn't take the account the wider policy framework. And I think, as Michael, the officer, touched on earlier, you know, he spoke about the number of strategies across the council, whether it's our emergency transport plan, whether it's our air quality action plan, all of those different strategies. And in order to really understand the effectiveness and the rationale, this is entirely consistent with what the council has been pursuing in terms of encouraging more people to walk, cycle, and take public transport in Hackney. We're not banning any forms of vehicle. What we are doing is we're trying to find a way in which we're trying to make it equitable, taking into account the considerations that Michael had said, which is that 7 in 10 households in Hackney don't own a car. Got one of the most highest polluted boroughs. And obviously we want people to come, you know, visit family, friends, to shop locally, to work. But at the same time, there has to be a fair balance in terms of good air quality and the need to drive. And obviously, I think what we have done is we have, again, without falling at risk of repeating already what I've already said, is we have, you know, Councillor Beanie Lovick spoke about finding a middle ground, and you know, we reflected on the initial proposals that we brought in, that we suggested in late last year, and I think an 80% reduction on those initial discount on those initial charges, and a 90% reduction on the electric powered two-wheelers is quite a significant reduction. I think if you know, More than that would be 100%, which would essentially be near enough to sort of a zero in some cases. And then obviously we've got rid of the maximum short hour hours, and then we've also going to phase the other crucial bit, I think, which we haven't really spoke about, is that this is going to be phased in 3 years. So that's the other bit. And then final thing on the equalities impact assessment, because I know this is really important, is Michael spoke about the next stage of the process, which is that we'll go for statutory consultation. As part of that statutory consultation, there will be a more fleshed out and fully done equalities impact assessment, which will be sort of put forward, and that follows the normal process of council policy and procedure moving forward. So it's not that the team hasn't considered it. What we're doing right now is we're moving through the framework within the constitution and the policy framework, the procedures that are set out by the council. So the equalities impact assessment would naturally follow. And then one final thing I would say is I do think, if I may suggest that, I think there is a bit of misunderstanding about the calculations, because I still, hearing lots of different figures being sort of heard around the room. And I think it may be a wise suggestion to maybe suggest a drop-in session with some of the councillors who are interested, maybe to understand the pricing models, because I think clearly, as Councillor Steinberger's just most recent quoted figures clearly doesn't make sense. And again, we're talking about this difference between Hackney residents, difference between visitors, and I think it might be useful if I'm happy for, I'm sure officers will be happy as well to do a drop-in session to explain some of those of how those charges work, because I think there's a bit of an understanding. And then final thing, sorry, Chair, is the monitoring is, again, it's really important to understand is that the monitoring that we're doing, it sits within a package of interventions that we're taking across the borough to reduce car usage and encourage, walking, cycling, take public transport. And that's done in line with what, this policy is very much in line and goes hand in hand with our air quality action plan, which sets out a monitoring framework on how we report back to GLA, and obviously we have to report back annually and bring back a report back to full council on that specifically, and that forms within, and the multi-cycle intervention that we're doing is part of a package of measures that Michael described to help us achieve our ambitions, the 47 actions that we set out in the air quality action plan, and as part of the standard procedural monitoring that we have to do as part of the air quality action plan. Of course, what the air quality team will do across the borough, across the council, sorry, is it will sort of liaise and has a monitoring framework in which we have to already report back to GLA as well. So I just think it's really important to understand that, you can't just look at this as a single alone item. You have to look at this as a package of interventions and how it already aligns with our policy framework. But on that note, I'll leave it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. I've just been, we've concluded summing up, Councillor Steinberger. I've just been advised that we need to finish by 10 o'clock, unless we agree a short extension. So I'm afraid there was only 1 hour listed for this item. We've allowed it to go on quite a lot longer than that to try and ensure a really sort of broad and fair discussion. We're going to, I think, myself and my colleagues are going to really briefly retire so that we can have some discussion, so we can come to a decision as quickly as possible. So we're going to propose
an extension.
Sorry. Well, I think we're going to have to agree an extension, but it's going to be as short as possible. We will agree an extension to the meeting overall. To the meeting overall, yes. Yeah, not to this item. No, we've got 2 other items which are important reports as well. So, Councillor Steinberger, briefly.
Yeah, I just want to make it very clear that equality and impact assessment is based on how we drew up the policy. We can't later on, it's like you're saying you're building a house, you first putting the roof and putting the equality impact assessment is based on what was happening.
Yeah, actually, well, in my opinion, the legal colleague can correct me, it's an ongoing duty, an equality impact assessment, with 3 limbs. So I think, but I do take your point, but it's an ongoing duty, the equality impact assessment. That's okay. I think myself and my colleagues are going to now retire in private. The live stream is going to be paused while we do this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just so everyone's clear, we're formally extending the time of this meeting to a maximum of 10:30, which is the maximum we can do within the procedural rules. So I'm now going to ask panel members to vote on this decision. I think we have to do this in roll call, what alphabetical order, do we? Yes. Yeah. So, okay. So I think in that case we start with Councillor Conway. So
Can I have a list of the? Do you
yeah.
want me to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah. So we've got so just to recap, we've got the three. We've got the three different options available, and also I think you're going to have a list. Look at the list of arguments that have been made. Yeah. So
I would like to vote to take no further action.
So it's fine. Thank you. Yeah. Did you want to add anything to that?
I would like to thank everybody who's come this evening and contributed towards this item, and I think it's been very helpful to understand it and the complexities and the impact that such policy changes will have on the lives of residents and commuters in the borough. I do recognise that it's challenging for people. It really is. I feel as though it's in line with our policy objectives in terms of reducing, CO2 in the borough. And that's. I think it brings it in line broadly with our position on cars, and yeah, that's the main reason for me.
Thank you. In alphabetical order, it's me next. I'd also like to vote to take no further action. I think it's been a really useful hearing. It's a really sort of important process. It's an important part of our sort of checks and balances as a council that these procedures are used where appropriate. I think we've had a very wide-ranging and extensive discussion, and we've covered, a number of different points. I'm satisfied that it's been, extensive long-term consultation on this policy, including public engagement beyond the formal consultation. There is going to be an additional period of statutory consultation, which will be, a further opportunity for points adjustments to be made. And I'm also satisfied that as a result of the consultation, a number of changes which are, to the benefit of residents affected have been made to this policy. I also take into account the fact that there has been an equality impact assessment, and the reassurances that a fuller equality impact assessment will be made going forward, and in line with the ongoing duty. I'm also taking into account the fact that this policy will be reviewed in line with our fees and charges policy, and I would hope that as part of that there's going to be extensive monitoring of the impact, and particularly in relation to the the impact on residents with protected characteristics, and the impact on all people who are affected by the policy. But I am satisfied that this is in line with our broader policy framework, and also in relation to our financial framework. So I'm now going to move to Councillor Hayhurst.
I also elect for no further action. I agree with all the reasons that have been given by my colleagues. The additional points I would make is it's clear to me that at page 72 there is a gradated emissions-based system in relation to the solo motorcycle bays, and it's clear that the figures that have been presented have been on one of the petrol engines, but it's clear that the figures are trying to encourage people to go to a zero emissions vehicle, which itself would be cheaper than public transport. So it's clearly trying to encourage and meet the policy objectives that have been set out, and so I think that's entirely consistent with the objectives. In terms of the first point, in terms of proportionality and the council state ambition to be 30% but the council expects this to be 70%, as I understood the officers to be saying essentially that a lot of work had already been done with respect to reducing car-based commuting, but there is more work to be done with respect to the motorcycle element, which therefore explains the greater percentage in that regard, which seems to be entirely, again, consistent with the policy aims. In terms of the financial element, it looks like it has been thought through, and I also take the point that with charges being introduced, we're not going to expect to see, I think it's expected a six-fold increase, and so therefore it would seem to be that the financial case stacks up. I'm also satisfied with respect to the ongoing nature of the equality impact assessment and the commitment that once we go out for statutory consultation, that will be looked at. I'm also satisfied that a lot of work seems to be done in terms of those that are in the gig economy to try and mitigate and assuage concerns in relation to that, and that's an ongoing piece of work.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Potter.
I also agree that we should take no for action. I mean, my colleagues have covered all of the reasons, I think, but largely to bring policy in line with cars, but also the 3-year staged approach and all of the work that's going to go into looking and monitoring the policy and the impact during that time. I was also satisfied with the work that's been done with Courier. Reiners and I'll look to find out and seek, the monitoring report to see the impact that this is having on works in general. But yes, support the decision made by the police.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, colleagues. So that concludes that item. Thank you everyone for attending and participating in this process this evening. Now we're moving on to agenda item 6. So in view of the lateness of the hour, this is the report of the Council Tax Reduction Scheme, Scrutiny Panel Task and Finish Group. I'm in view of the lights of the hour, just lateness of the hour, and the fact that we've had some discussion in relation to this at the last scrutiny panel. I'm just going to ask members to note that. The final item is item 7, which is again, it's quite disappointing that we don't have sufficient time for this item. Sorry, Tracy. Yeah,
Reporters to agree.
Yeah, agree. Sorry, apologies. Need to agree. So, item 7 is the Net Zero Scrutiny Panel draft report. Briefly, this report, which contains 28 different recommendations, is the sort of, the accumulation of work that we've done across the scrutiny commissions and also scrutiny panel in relation to Hackney's approach to net zero. So this represents the findings and recommendations from Health in Hackney, Living in Hackney, Skills Economy and Growth, and CYP during the municipal year 2021 and 22. So we've had coordinated work programmes. These will be our, this is going to be an ongoing piece of work in relation to scrutiny panel's review of the net zero agenda, and these are our initial recommendations, but I will be asking members to agree this initial report, and I'm hoping we'll have some maybe further discussion at a future meeting on these recommendations and the future direction of that work.
Agreed.
Agreed, yes. And thank you, Chair, for leading on such a really strong forward pieces.
Yeah. So, yeah, so there's a summary of that report online for anyone who wants to look at it in more detail. So, right, so the minutes of the previous meeting, are they agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah, we've had a written response to the matters arising, which will be published with the minutes. So agenda item 9 is the work programme, which is for noting.
Note.
Yeah, so we can obviously develop that in the next municipal year. Okay, that's final. That concludes the final scrutiny panel for this municipal year. Thank you very much, everyone, for staying late and for your contributions and participation over the last municipal year. Thank you very much, Craig and Tracy, as well, for all the hard work that you've been done over the last 2 days. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.